Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The Restart Europe Forum will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Director of Think Tank Europa, Lykke Friis.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, good afternoon, and also a very warm welcome to all of you in this Restart Europe forum. And also a very warm welcome to those of you following us online. Today, 45 years ago, Ronald Reagan won his first presidential election. At that time, he was looked upon as a trigger-happy cowboy. Goodness, how things have changed. There are many anecdotes about Reagan. One of them relates to Sweden. One day, the president was scheduled to meet Sweden's Prime Minister Olof Palme, but Reagan was not happy about this, so he'd asked his advisor, "Isn't he a communist?" "No, Mr. President, he is rather an anti-communist." And what did Reagan answer? "I don't care what kind of communist he is." Well, I can assure you that the organizers, GLOBSEC, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Think Tank Europa are grateful that you care about what kind of Europe we have and how it will change, or rather maybe how it should change in the future. Among you, we have policymakers, business leaders, and experts from across Europe in a mix, each of you bringing key insights and experience to the table that will help us confront the challenges ahead and shape the solutions needed to improve the EU's ability to compete globally. As you may have noticed on your way over here, in particular if you are not from Denmark, is the world-famous Little Mermaid. For over a century, she has witnessed Copenhagen evolve from industrial port city to a hub of green innovation. Unlike the Little Mermaid, Europe cannot just sit on a rock and watch the waves of change go by. We need to be ready to dive into new ideas, technologies, and partnerships that can help shape the next tide of growth. Over the next 2 days, our discussions will therefore focus on how we can translate the by now almost world-famous Draghi report into action. And we have to hurry since the implementation of the Draghi report has already stalled. There are many figures out there, but according to a report by the European Policy Innovation Council, only 11% of the recommendations have been put into action. Today, we will therefore follow the approach of Winston Churchill, who once said, "Every morning I take out my notebook and write down, 'This has to be done today.'" So, what do we think that we have to do today? Overall question. And the organizers, well, we have written down the following ideas or topics into our notebooks. First segment, reclaiming Europe's ability to compete, will focus on how to secure clean and affordable energy for industrial renewal, how to unlock capital to power Europe's next growth chapter, and how to close the innovation gap to keep Europe at the forefront of technology. So, let's use this opportunity to exchange ideas openly, challenge assumption, and let's try if we can actually identify the tangible actions that we need in order to truly restart Europe. With that, I hand over to you, Robert. I also just want to say GLOBSEC is a brilliant organization, and we've been very happy to cooperate with you. And we like your sort of spirit and your sort of optimism. Let's do this conference, and well, we have two months to do it, but I'm sure we'll be able to do it. Well, we did. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lykke, and I have to say it's my great honor to partner with you on this conference because, as you said, we had 2 months to organize this, but it would not be possible without the cooperation with you and your organization. It is my great honor to welcome you all of you here and open the conference Restart Europe here in the beautiful city of Copenhagen. Let me start by expressing my thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, which is our co-host, and especially to Minister of European Affairs of Denmark, Marie Bjerre, Without your support, it would be impossible. But also to Minister Botko for co-hosting this, the think tank Europa sponsors, and everybody who has contributed to this conference. But also to all of you for coming here and committing your time, energy, and your intellect. I'm happy that we are gathering here in Denmark, not only because it's the EU presidency, but because Denmark is an inspiration. It is a mid-sized country who is showing that a mid-sized country can punch above its weight, not only politically, but also in business terms. You have showcased not only during your presidency, but as a country, that you can change Europe, you can change the world. You have been championing on many of the European policies. That's why I'm very happy that we are here, because together we can show that Europe can and must change. GLOBSEC, that I'm the founder and president of, we founded with friends 20 years ago, has emerged as one of the leading policy institutions in Europe. We are coming from Central Europe, but now with offices in Washington, Brussels, Prague, Vienna, Kiev, and Bratislava. This is one of the leading policy institutes and platforms which is trying to connect public and private leaders and stakeholders for conversations to advance Europe's security, resilience, and competitiveness, so it can stay a constructive and influential player in shaping the global future. Now we are gathering here in a decisive turning point for Europe. Geopolitical tensions, changes in American foreign policy, Russia, which wants to challenge Europe, but also AI revolution, the industrial transformation, the green and digital transitions are completely redefining the continent's economic foundations. What we see today is a systemic transformation. This is not only a period of unpredictability and change. This is a systemic transformation at the end of which the world and Europe will be completely different. Whoever thinks that this will be 4 or 5 years and we'll come back to the very nice world that we lived in before is mistaken. In this transformation, we cannot underestimate the responsibility that our generation holds to make sure that Europe at the end is stronger and there are more winners than losers in this transformation. And yes, it brings a lot of disruption, a lot of unpredictability, but we have to look at it also as an opportunity to lay down new foundations of economic competitiveness for Europe, for security and resilience. And this is something that the EU Danish presidency rightly places at the heart of Europe's agenda. Focusing on clean energy, technological excellence, capital mobilization, effective governance as the foundation of sustainable growth. To secure long-term prosperity, Europe must reinforce its industrial backbone, close its innovation gap, mobilize capital at scale, strategic investment in clean technologies, digital infrastructure, and next-generation industries such as AI, quantum, biotechnology, and space is absolutely crucial. At the same time, energy security, healthcare resilience, smarter regulations will be vital to strengthening Europe's productivity, stability, and attractiveness to investors. The discussions at today's and tomorrow's conference, which is called Restart of Europe, will feed into what we call GLOBSEC Competitiveness Tracker, our new yearly evidence-based assessment on how we deliver on EU level on competitiveness compass goals. By aligning industrial, energy, and innovation policies under the EU Danish presidency's leadership, Europe can deliver on its promise, a cleaner, stronger, and a more competitive future. So let's seize this moment. Let's make these conversations today and tomorrow count, and let's restart Europe. So I hope you will have a wonderful conversations. Thank you very much. And let me welcome to the stage Minister for European Affairs, Minister Mari Biere. Please, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to open the Restart Europe conference co-hosted by Denmark, GLOBSEC and Think Tank Europe. We have an exciting afternoon ahead of us where we will discuss ways of improving Europe's competitiveness. We are gathering here under the heading, Reclaiming Europe's Competitiveness. But in truth, what we are really talking about is securing Europe's future. In a world shaped by shifting power dynamics, technology disruption, and geopolitical uncertainty, Europe's competitiveness is no longer just a matter of economic performance, it is a strategic necessity. Because a competitive Europe is a Europe that can defend its values, set global standards, and remain the partner of choice. That is why Europe must move from theory and analysis to action, from the Draghi and Letta report to concrete initiatives. This is also why the Danish EU Presidency has placed competitiveness at the very top of our agenda. A stronger European economy starts with creating better conditions for businesses. Simpler rules, less administrative burdens, fewer barriers across the Union, and mobilizing private investments. And things are moving in the right direction, but we are far from the goal. We are making progress on simplification with the first 6 omnibus simplification packages presented, but we are far from the Commission's target of reducing burdens up to 37.5 billion euros. The first 4 omnibus packages deliver a reduction of burdens on 8.3 billion euros. That is only 1/5 of the way. To reach the target, we need to take an ambitious and critical look at existing legislation. Just last month, we adopted changes to the CBAM rules, exempting 90% of all importers while still covering 99% of the emissions. This is a good example of how to begin the simplification agenda. We have to counter burdens on existing legislation and administration. But we also have to look at bureaucracy that is already on the way with approved legislation. Under the Danish presidency, we have fast-tracked simplification proposals on agriculture and defense. The simplification agenda is not always easy. Rules were initially put forward for a reason, but to change status quo, it takes courage and persistence. We need not only to simplify, but also to remove rules and burdens. And there will be bumps on the road. There has been bumps on the road. For instance, the recent vote on the European Parliament on the omnibus on simplification. We must deliver if we want to make real change. And we must keep pushing forward. As presidency, we do our utmost to keep up the speed every day. Because what is at stake is no less than our economy, security and resilience. It is also about Europe's role in the world. But competitiveness cannot and should not only be delivered by Brussels alone. Europe needs national courage to take on reforms. The work starts at home. National reforms can make European economies more resilient, dynamic, and global competitive, to the benefit of our entire union. National reforms can improve productivity, innovation, and labor supply. We, as member states, we must step up and do our part. This also means daring to think outside the box, to be bold, and having the will to go through with unpopular decisions because they are right in the long run. Allow me to take you back in time and highlight 3 concrete examples from the Danish work with reforms. In the 1970s and the 1980s, Denmark experienced high inflation as a result of 2 oil crises. The effects were tangible. Denmark, together with other countries, had to introduce car-free Sundays to conserve fuel. The Danish salaries didn't match the rising prices on food in the supermarket. I don't know whether that sounds familiar. And our debt skyrocketed. But bold Danish governments took action. Firstly, through an economic package of October 1986, a controversial reform that, for example, made it more expensive to obtain mortgages. But it worked. Second, our pension system. Since the 1990s, labor market pension funds have become the norm, in addition to state pension and statutory pension schemes. A portion of every salary is saved, not just for retirement, but they are invested. These funds now form a powerful financial resource that strengthens both individual security and national resilience. I believe this model holds great potential across Europe. Imagine what we could achieve if even a fraction of the billions currently sitting in European banks' accounts were channeled into defense, innovation, green transition, or critical infrastructure. Denmark used to be a net receiving country, but national reforms made us richer, and around 2000, Denmark became one of the net contributing countries to the EU budget. The third example is our so-called welfare agreement from 2006. The agreement included a reform where the pension age rises in line with the population's life expectancy. It was a fundamental and forward-looking reform that has helped safeguard our welfare model. And it is one of the reasons we are able to invest in both defense and competitiveness today. These reforms were not easy, but they were necessary. They came with high political risk, but they made Denmark stronger. The current Danish government has continued the reform tradition and, for example, in February 2023, removed a national holiday in order to improve labor supply. So why am I mentioning these Danish public reforms? Because they illustrate a broader point. European competitiveness is a shared responsibility. Not every country needs to do exactly what Denmark did, but every country must take responsibility for its own economy and do necessary reforms. In my opinion, if we want more from the EU budget, we must also be willing to deliver more at home. I hope more member states will find inspiration in the Danish example, just as we will take inspiration from others. Not necessarily one-to-one, but with the same boldness and responsibility for own economy, resilience and welfare. Europe needs a mobilization of private capital. We need to engage with investments in Europe. We need a strong private and public sector to stay competitive. Ladies and gentlemen, for over 75 years, Europe has risen stronger from every crisis. This time is no different. My message is simple. If we want the EU to have a voice in the world of uncertainty and power politics, we must first maintain strong and competitive economies. If we want Europe to be a global player, we need strong economies to be founded in our common values. If we want to protect our freedom, we need the financial firepower to back it up. If we want to lead the green and digital transition, we must unleash the capital and innovation already within our grasp. We are not starting from scratch. Europe has the world's largest single market. We have high trust, skilled people, low corruption, and stable institutions. Our potential is enormous, but potential is nothing without action. We must start to think more as Europeans. More often ask, what solutions are good for Europe? How can we inspire each other? If we manage this, I have no doubt that a greener, richer, healthier, and safer Europe will emerge. And Europe will remain the best place in the world to live, to work, and to grow up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an extremely energetic speech. I was just took out my mobile phone and sort of phoned, more or less phoned, at least you could say, mentally a friend in Cyprus, because there's no way that they have to prepare for the EU presidency, because you'll just continue for another term, I presume, because all of us know that Cyprus has is ready for the next presidency. But you're ready, I could definitely feel that. But let's just hear, I mean, what kind of results have actually sort of been achieved during the Danish EU presidency? If you take out your scorecard, what does it actually say?
Well, look, we would be happy to take on another period, but I'm not sure we're allowed to. Half year goes really fast. As I mentioned, competitiveness has really been high on our agenda. That is why we also put a focus on it in several council formations, in my own General Affairs Council, but also in the ECOFIN and in the Competitive Council. We have speeded up this process within the council now, reached 5 agreements in the council on the 6 omnibus proposals. Very, very happy that we reached an agreement with the European Parliament on the second omnibus on investment. We are also hoping to deliver one on the first omnibus on simplification. That is considered the big one. We're still hoping for the European Parliament to reach an agreement, so that it's possible for us to reach an agreement together with the Council. And also on agriculture simplification, we're also aiming at reaching an agreement before 1st of January.
So many of these issues are work in progress. And whether 2 months will be extremely important for you then to close these various important dossiers. But just to press you a bit, what's the most important, would you say, that you have been able to agree upon? Is there one thing you would say, okay, after you're president, this was really important for Europe's growth?
Well, I have to be honest to say, at this stage, it is not enough. If we would close our presidency tomorrow with only delivering an agreement on the second omnibus, that is not enough. We need to put up speed. We need to agree on more. The Commission came with 6 proposals, and as I mentioned, 6 proposals. That is not enough either. That's only 1/5 of actually what they are planning to aim at. So we need to make an agreement on also the first. If we make an agreement on that, I would consider that as a very great success. And then it's a bonus if we can also make an agreement on the agriculture omnibus. But I am worried because right now
that was clear from your speech. But still, I mean, back to Churchill. I mean, also when you look upon Europe's challenges, what would you say is the most important thing for the EU to do? I mean, I would say, basically completing the single market. For instance, the Capital Markets Union, also regards to energy, services. Where are you in this overall picture? What is the most important thing?
We have to think differently. The world order, as we know,
the mindset, basically.
The mindset, the world order, as we has known, has fundamentally changed. Europe has to be a great power on its own, and that means that we politically that we can move just at our own defense and our economy. So we have to focus much more on security and defense. If we're not capable of defending ourselves, then we cannot. Then we will be independent. We'll be dependent on the U.S. and others. We will just be ran over. We saw that with the trade agreement this summer. So that is also linked to it. Investment in defense is one of the most important agendas, but we can't isolate it to only that. Economy is also important because we need to have the economy to spend on our defense.
And that's why you could actually have mentioned your overall sort of policy regards to Ukraine as one of your sort of points where you have actually sort of been able to move the debate ahead. But you don't have to comment on that. But you have to comment on another thing. I mean, I mentioned the report where it says that Draghi's report, we've only implemented 11%. I'm not sure whether whether it's the right number. It doesn't really matter for our conversation. But do you, I mean, sense the same thing that I'm sort of experiencing when I'm traveling also to Brussels, but also capitals? Hang on a minute, this Draghi moment is just, it's gone. We didn't really live up to the hopes. Is that true?
I'm not that pessimistic. And then also I share that the number 11%, I mean, what that number, what does that mean? That it's
11.5, you know.
But it is a report made by someone outside. It's not from the European Parliament. It's not from the Council. It's not something that agreed on politically.
It's probably made by a think tank. So watch out.
But seriously, like, who is saying that we should? Who have said that we should deliver 100% of the Draghi proposals? We live in a democracy where we decide what is the right way to go. This is just inspiration. I agree, it is very good inspiration, but the goal has never been to reach 100%. So I think the number is a little bit like, why are we even measuring this? What we should be measuring is the condition for our businesses. Are we moving in the right direction? Is it getting easier to do business? How is the climate? How is our competitiveness? And in that regard, yes, I think we are still moving too slow. We are on the right track. The Commission is on the right track, delivering the proposals. The Council is on the right track. I think the European Parliament could move a little bit faster, but that, I guess, that counts for all of us. And then we have to keep up the political momentum, which is currently there. I hear it all over. I've been traveling, you know that, Look, I've been traveling to all EU member countries, and every country, they say that competitiveness, how we can strengthen that, is on the top agenda. It is still, but we have a duty to make sure that it stay on the agenda for the years to come.
And we used to think about climate and also green growth. This was a sort of expression we used to talk about, green growth. We used to think that could lead to exactly growth. But now, if you look upon the climate debate and look upon, again, the green growth debate, where is it? Tonight, I know that your colleague, Lars Ågaard, will negotiate with his colleague to see whether he's able to agree upon a 2040 goal, 2040 goal with his colleagues. This will be just almost at the same time as Ursula von der Leyen has left to go to Brazil. Goodness, if she arrives in Brazil without any kind of negotiation mandate, I mean, what are we talking about? So my question here, because you're not Lars Ågaard, but my question is, where is the green agenda connected to the growth agenda?
So we're crossing our fingers today because we really hope that we will be able
cross
to.
Both of them, yeah?
Yes, we hope to be delivering on this 2040 climate goal. The climate agenda is not as strong in Europe as it used to be. It is also one of our top priorities, and that's because we link it with competitiveness. But I also realize that is not how all countries see it, and even political parties. Some see the climate agenda going against competitiveness. That and maybe also because there has been a lot of rules regulating, aiming for more climate transition, but actually has just been giving bureaucracy. And I think the CBAM regulation illustrates this quite well. We are capable of removing 90% of the rules and still getting 99% of the CO2 emissions. So that clearly illustrates that we have gone too far in regulating to get the climate goal. But the climate ambition has to go hand in hand, and it also does, because in the future, we just have to have the long-term view on. In the future, no one is going to use fossil fuel. And the countries, the regions in the world that are creating those new green technologies, they will be leading. That's why we have to agree today on the climate goal.
So it's a balance at the end of the day. But I mean, that would really be, I mean, if the EU is not able to come up with a target at a COP negotiations where they have to sort of pressure other countries to agree to come up with their targets, then then it's going to be really, really difficult for the EU to claim that it is still a global
That is difficult.
superpower, whatever term you want to use. We don't have that much time. I just want to go to the budget. I mean, the MFF, because you are sort of steering that negotiation on the so-called negotiation box without numbers. I've tried explaining that sort of high schools in Denmark. I was not very successful. So a negotiation budget with a box without numbers. Okay, but does this in any way, is there a connection between what we just discussed about Europe's growth and this negotiation box, or rather
Absolutely.
the EU?
Yeah.
Rather the EU's budget, I should say.
Absolutely, it is
Okay,
very
it
well
is crucial.
linked.
Okay,
It is because when we're discussing the budget, it's the budget for 28 to 2035 for a pretty long period. We have to have a focus on competitiveness, and we have to think differently when talking about the MFF. The aim has to be, how can Europe be stronger? How can we collectively have stronger economy, be able to defend ourselves? So the architecture of this budget have to be different. And also we have to be sure that the money spent is well spent. That it actually deliver results. And that was also why I mentioned 3 points on reforms. If you want to have money from the EU budget, it also has to be an inspiration to make reforms at home.
And Denmark will then support a higher contribution to the budget?
Well, it's a box without number.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That was a smart one.
Right.
Okay, because
we'll talk about that after
the election,
after we made the box.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Final sort of question here connected to enlargement. You sort of almost touched upon it about the importance of regards to security for our ability to grow, but one could also make the argument that enlargement is very much about security, which I'm sure you agree on. But if you look upon now the enlargement round, I mean, obviously we're talking about Ukraine, we're talking West Balkans. Do you see that as a way to increase our chances of competing with the rest of the world? Or is it rather the opposite?
Well, enlargement is mostly about security. We cannot lose those countries. It is about stability for Europe, but it is also about economy. What we see every time your EU has grown bigger, it has been to the benefit not just for the new countries, but also the existing countries having a bigger internal market. So of course, it's also very valuable for economy to go further with enlargement for Ukraine, Moldova, and also the countries in West Balkan. And then also, I think what you're pointing at is the global influence. Right now, it's hard for Europe to have global influence. We have China, we have US, strong great powers, and Europe also have to play a role. How can we play a role in this new geopolitical scene? And enlargement there also play a role, because we will have a higher weight if we have more countries, if we are more countries together.
And do you have the mobile number of Viktor Orban?
No, and he doesn't have mine either. But see, that is the problem. We have one country blocking for Ukraine. They're only blocking Hungary. The only country only blocking for Ukraine. But Ukraine is the key to enlargement. The reason why we're talking about enlargement again is due to Ukraine. We have many candidate countries. In fact, we have 10 candidate countries, and the countries in West Balkan, they've been candidate countries for many years, but there has been enlargement fatigue until Ukraine. Now there's a new momentum, because now it's also about security. And that is why we have to unlock this situation. It's very difficult to lift the blockade from Hungary. They are blocking, and if you follow what Viktor Orban says, he will continue to block. But then we're trying to move on other ways around. If we're still doing all the work, if Ukraine is still doing all the work, then we will be able to open negotiation clusters, closing them again pretty fast, as long as everyone is delivering.
So I guess we still have to phone Cyprus and ask them then to continue this
they will
endeavor.
Yeah. Luckily, all other countries except Hungary agrees that this is a key priority. Also Cyprus. So they will also move forward with this agenda. And after that, it will be Ireland.
Yeah, and I guess there is also an election in Hungary coming up, and who knows what will happen there? You never know. The opposition candidate may win, and he probably has a different position with regards to Ukraine. Thank you very much. Great
Thank
sort
you.
of discussion.
Thank you.
And I just read the brilliant book by the former Secretary of State from NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, over the weekend, where he states that Europe has been in a recess from 1989 till 2022, so until the full-scale invasion by Putin. I guess you could say that was part of our discussion here. You could say that Europe has also been in a recess with regards to the economy. So it is, as we said also at the beginning, now it's a time to dig deeper into these various sort of areas that are important, for instance, the Capital Markets Union, which we also sort of touched upon briefly. So thank you very much again to Marie, and then we move on to the next sort of person moderating this next panel, Tamara Lagurashvili, head of our first panel discussion, and the title is Securing Clean, Competitive Industrial Renewal. We're just going to have a reshift up here, so bear with us. Could be 2 minutes before we start again. As you would prefer. Should I go in the very end? Okay, no worries. I will go in the very end. I think we can start. I'm loud enough so my voice will carry, but in case the mic is also here. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers for putting this a very timely conversation in a very lovely city of Copenhagen, and welcome to the panel called Securing Clean and Competitive Industrial Revival. I am Tamara Lagurashvili, Director of Central and Eastern Europe at Clean Task Force, and I will be moderating today's discussion. Europe's heavy industry is squeezed by really high energy prices, grid bottlenecks, and also the implications of the fractured geopolitical order, and also the reassessment of the once thought reliable partnerships. What we know for sure is that this mandate of 5 years from the European Commission is having really big focus on energy sovereignty and industrial resilience. And we know that two key items for this mandate is really looking at lowering the energy prices and completing the energy union as the part of the action plan for affordable energy. And another one is clean industrial deal and some of the sectoral roadmaps, some of them that have been already published this year, some of them are to be seen. We have already heard some of the wonderful things that Danish presidency is achieving and has achieved in terms of the simplification, because indeed, we don't need any more rules, but we really need the coherence and actual action on the stage. Today's discussion, we hope that we will go beyond the buzzword of the competitiveness and really dive deeper into the actual long-term actionable items at the European stage. We'll be zooming on the critical raw materials and trying to think about some of the ways that Europe can go beyond the stockpiling strategy and see how they can revive some of the international partnerships, especially in the light of
G7's new critical action mineral plan. We'll be also looking at the energy infrastructure, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, where we have a lot of cyber attacks, but also physical threats to the energy infrastructure. What are the guardrails and how the EU, NATO, but also energy ministers should be really collaborating together on these matters. I would also like to mention that this panel today and the conversation directly contributes to GLOBSEC's competitiveness tracker that has been already mentioned in the opening. This is an expert-led assessment, basically, that looks at how EU is delivering on the various aspects of the competitiveness. And today's conversation, first focusing on energy security, is actually linking to the clear subchapter of the tracker looking at securing clean, affordable, and sustainable energy for all Europeans. With that, and without further ado, I would like to introduce our absolute stellar panel, which is a very nice mix, I think, of think tank, but also the government and the industry. And we hopefully will have some 3 to 5 key action items as the part of this conversation. So we start with Kate Kasemet, Secretary of State, Government Office, Republic of Estonia. Helena Bill Albrechtsson, I'm hoping that I pronounced your name this time. Director, Energy and Resources, Rasmussen Global. And Piotr Hornak, member of the Board of Directors, Confederation of Industry of the Czech Republic. Thank you very much for joining today's conversation. And before diving deep into the conversation, some housekeeping rules. We'll have moderated discussion for about half an hour, and then we will have 10 to 15 minutes also for Q&A as well. And I'm really counting on the GLOBSEC. I have very bad sense of the timing, so I really count on you to give me some of the pointers when we are at the time. Wonderful. Kate, maybe we can start with you. As a person who works a lot in the Central and Eastern European space, I know very well one thing, and I have come aware to that, is that if we want to avoid the two-speed Europe, especially in the sense of the industrial revival, we have to make sure that energy prices, as simple as it is, goes down. Especially, we cannot have the countries like Poland and Romania having some of the highest wholesale market prices, because otherwise no investor will be really incentivized to go and actually do business there. From Estonian government's perspective, could you reflect what could be two or three key decisions at the EU or the national level that you think could drastically and in the smallest amount of time really lower the industrial power prices?
Yeah, just first of all, I'm very happy to be here. Before I started as a Secretary of State in the Estonian government, I was actually permanent secretary of the Ministry of Climate, which also has energy. So I know quite well the topic. First, I think, of course, the current model, which still was before the war, Ukraine war, very much is kind of based on the fossil fuels and the cheap Russian energy. This for sure will not work. This is clear. Second, I think there is no magic bullet, of course, which would solve this energy price issue. And thirdly, the energy is, of course, and the industry also are the areas where you can't really make very quick changes. Yeah, decisions you make today will give you a result maybe after 5 is a very good time frame, maybe after 10 years. So when you take these points into account, what can be done? We are in Denmark, yeah. So it's the Scandinavia, I think, has the most competitive electricity prices when we look to the Europe in general. So, and they think there are three. Of course, the people here can argue. There are many people from Scandinavian countries. There are three this kind of, in a way, preconditions for that. There is high share of renewables. The highest share of renewables is in Sweden, Finland, also Denmark. Secondly, there is still some share of the energy mix, also a more stable this kind of sources, like for example nuclear. And then there is investments to grid. Just now, I think, was it this week? I think the new big electricity cable between Sweden and Finland is opened, which will clearly have a positive impact on the prices and connectivity. And then there is still this kind of special attention to the competitiveness of the companies, also what concerns the price, and what concerns how many grid fees and tariffs actually the companies are paying, and when you compare with the ordinary consumer. So I don't think that there was any other better approach what can be used, and that in Central Europe you could have something else which would give you, maybe you argue with me, but which would give the better result. And then this is why we tried to do in Estonia also. We're trying to move to the direction where we just have adopted a new energy strategy draft in the government last week, and this is aiming for keeping the price also in Estonia competitive when you compare the whole region. So it's not only Scandinavia, but also Baltic countries, and luckily also Poland. Then it raises the average level to some extent. And the same measures, still the investments to renewables, grid development, and looking on how the investment can be stimulated, both what concerns industry and electricity. Maybe one last thing, I don't want to steal all the time at the beginning. I think when we ask the question and what needs to be done in European level and what in the States level, so I think the energy is still, even when we talk about the energy union, then the energy is still, I think, a lot of national issue also on how you really build up the energy mix, what support schemes you have, etc. What needs to be done in European level, I think, is the interconnectivity, the grids. The same Finnish cable I mentioned is also, I think, 50% financed by the EU. Estonia would not have any connections, I think, to the European countries without Central European financing. But Europe can't finance everything, so I think the financing should go in the next perspective also mainly to the where really the Europe can give the added value, which is connectivity. Also in electricity, it can be also this kind of gas type of things. This will not disappear. What concerns connections. Second is enabling regulation more in terms of the indeed simplification, which has been mentioned several times. I think the clean industry initiative, what the Commission has come up with, is a good initiative in terms that the direction is right. It gives more this kind of more simple state aid rules, more this kind of abilities to deal with the direct purchasing agreements or the PPAs to the member states. So I think this is all good, but the many things still need to be done in the government level. We have also a huge simplification program. We have formed a special efficiency council to the government and to the prime minister, where we have collected direct proposals from the companies on what needs to be simplified. Two key issues in that respect which really stand out. One is the planning process, which really had hundreds of proposals how to make it in a more efficient way. Now we're implementing these changes. And the second is the permitting licensing part of the process. So I think these are this type of basically the financing, either from the government or the EU part, more simple rules, which should lead to the more electricity production. Because when we don't have more production, new production on the renewables and also nuclear, then the prices will not go down.
Thank you very much. And I think your emphasis, of course, on a lot of things, but also on grids particularly and the interconnectivity. tying to the energy security, we have seen a couple of cases already in the Spain blackout, how the interconnectors have actually come to the rescue. We have seen a couple of times in Poland, but also when Transnistria in Moldova was at the very close, basically, levels of being completely on the blackout. I think Moldovan grid got interconnected to the Romanian in under 2 weeks. So I would really also like to keep the momentum about the interconnectivity and how do we think, especially in this part of Europe where energy and physical security are so intertwined. Helen, maybe let's go next to you about the Rasmus Global's work. A lot of it is also focusing on actually safeguarding the critical energy infrastructure. And I'm really happy, of course, like selfishly, that I have people from the region who like from Central and Eastern Europe. And I'm saying that because, of course, this is the part of Europe where, once again, the physical and energy infrastructure and security are completely intertwined. In the couple of months, we have seen the space invasion of several countries, including Denmark, of course, the origin. We have some suspicions, but we are not completely sure where it came from. So as we are building more infrastructure, cross-border, undersea, could you please reflect on your work and also your work, of course, in Ukraine as well? Because I think they are doing some of the really inspiring work that Europeans can take the page from their playbook and see where do you see the key vulnerabilities that Europe should be really focusing on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And I guess I'm kind of the think tanker on the panel here. Although Rasmussen Global is not a think tank, to be fair, but we do a lot of interesting work. In particular around Ukraine, where we have an office full of with 7 power women, Ukrainians that I had the pleasure to work with doing this report. We did a study basically of lessons learned from Ukraine when it comes to energy resilience, given that Ukraine is sadly a real life case of how to deal with massive attacks on energy infrastructure, which Russia is currently doing. And essentially, I think the main message you talked about Europe's vulnerabilities, and I'll get into that, but basically, in short, Europe is not prepared to face large-scale threats. That's where we are. Europe is doing, is going on the path towards taking this more seriously. The European Commission is right now conducting basically a revision of its energy security architecture. I think we'll see some of the results of that in 2026. But basically, I think the study from Ukraine and what I can drag out of this is that there are, I would say, three main elements in terms of Europe's vulnerabilities. So one thing is this complete lack of insufficient coordination and information sharing, especially between industry, public authorities, and the military. In the case of Ukraine, they actually didn't have very clear sort of governance structures before the war, but they have been, of course, forced to adapt to the new reality, and now have, I think, especially very interestingly, good collaborations between the operators of the energy facilities and the local governments in the areas where these facilities are located, and then with the military. And then you have the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy that basically tracks damages, coordinates recovery, and kind of allocates support. So that's kind of the central hub, so to speak. Europe still operates in, I would call them, national silos. So that's one area where we really need to more seriously structure our coordination mechanisms. Secondly, I would say Europe was and still is highly centralized when it comes to their energy system. What they found in light of the war is that this is a really vulnerable, a very, very vulnerable system. And part of the path towards decentralizing is actually investing in renewables, such as wind and solar. Quite sort of simply, if you take out a one wind turbine, that doesn't mean that the entire wind park can't still deliver power. So the vulnerabilities are the substations, and these need to be protected. When it comes to Europe, we're very, very advanced when it comes to, of course, development and deployment of renewables. I think where we are still lacking is to have this systematic security approach to new energy infrastructure. So thinking about security concerns as we build new infrastructure, especially the protection of these critical nodes, the substations, and then thinking about having proper redundancy and backup systems, making sure that we have this actual physical protection, having robust cybersecurity frameworks that are built. So it's really this resilience by design concept. And then a third thing I want to highlight, and we've already started talking a little bit about it, the importance of interconnectors. So Ukraine had this very rapid synchronization with the European grid right at the onset of the war. And this has been a game changer for them in terms of having emergency electricity imports. We are getting better in Europe. There are targets for interconnection, and some countries are better than others, though. That's just the reality. I think always dangerous to pat yourself on the back, as I'm a Danish national, but the EU, the Nordics are leaders when it comes to interconnection. That's just a fact. We can see it in the percentages of the interconnection targets. And we have other neighbors, especially in Southern Europe, that are lagging behind. So those are kind of the three main elements, I think, in terms of vulnerabilities that I would highlight.
Helen, thank you very much. And maybe two very quick follow-up questions. And if also anybody on the panel wants to respond, because of course your countries have also experienced firsthand some of those incursions, so to say. Helen, the first thing that you mentioned in the vulnerabilities and national silos, do you already see or suggest some steps on the close coordination? And the second one, and feel free also not to respond to that one, but have you seen that the Europe's and NATO's response by default has been reflecting the reality of the danger, especially when the skies of Poland, Romania, but also the Nordic countries have been violated in a very short period of time?
I think it's difficult to say if how exactly that kind of cooperation should look. One thing I think is very interesting is when I spoke to NATO energy security experts, and they talked about this subsea coordination cell, which actually is meant to address this exact problem of, for instance, the security of the subsea cables. That's a mechanism where you have the operators of the cables, owners and operators of the cables. You have the military and you have the public authorities that actually have a coordination mechanism where it's not always, sometimes it's the operators that see a threat and report that in, sometimes it'll be NATO. But there was not so long ago an incident where NATO was alerted to Russian ships close to a cable, and very, very quickly were able to mobilize and be in the area. So I mean, that's a very concrete thing that I think could be interesting to explore, whether that's possible to expand upon or replicate in other areas than just the undersea infrastructure, which is, of course, is in great focus right now because of all the incidents there have been, but should be just as important to look at when it comes to the land domain, for instance.
Yeah, I wanted to disagree on this silo thing based on Estonian experience. So draw the same example. Estonian undersea electricity cable with Finland has been broken now twice by the shadow fleet. Both times, I think, costed to Estonian electricity consumer around 100 million euros. What we paid more compared with what we actually would have paid when the cable would be okay. Normally it happens, I don't know why, before the winter, when the prices are higher and demand is higher. But in a way, now it has changed. We are quite confident that it will not happen anymore because we have actually very good cooperation with NATO. There is the Baltic Sentry, this kind of special initiative. There is also good cooperation between the countries, and maybe in political level, yes, the cooperation is not so good. But I think the level of system operators, or the DSOs, so they are called, I think have still, at least in the Baltic Sea region, have a very very close cooperation. And why I say that is that you can, I invite everybody to Estonia to look how we do it also, because we did the other way around. I think Ukraine connected to the European network, European grid, yes, and Moldova also. We also connected to the European network, but we disconnected or desynchronized from the Russian network, and we did it in February. One cable was also then broken, which created additional risks, but it required a lot of, my point is that it required a lot of cooperation between the DSOs of the Baltic countries, also with the Finland, with whom we have the connections, also with Poland, where the Lithuania has the connections, and at the end of the day it worked out actually very well in terms of cooperation. We were prepared to every kind of different risks. If we have time, we can talk about it a little bit on how to really protect the grid, etc. But actually it worked. But we had I think the trick, of course, is that we had this kind of purpose or aim, and I saw how it mobilized all the stakeholders in the different countries, in the government, in the DSOs, in the companies. And when you don't have this type of trigger or the goal, we really need to look through all the aspects of risks and the vulnerabilities. Then of course you don't maybe do it, and you don't do necessary investments also, and then the situation can be more trickier. But I just wanted to say that it's maybe in general it is so, but I think there are also quite good examples where you can learn on how the cooperation actually works well, and how the grid and operators and the governments are actually ready also to these hybrid attacks and risks.
If I can just add, I mean, and I think the interesting thing with the case of interconnectors is that it's really a case where there's both of course the security imperative, but there's also many other several other benefits, right? There's the energy efficiency, there's affordability, flexibility of our energy system. So even countries that might not feel the security imperative as much as we do in the east in north of Europe, should still have an interest in for other reasons perhaps, but with the added benefit that then we are also more secure, Europe as a whole.
But I wanted also to say that in a land sphere, it is of course much easier to face the hybrid attacks also compared to the sea and undersea cables, and it's much quicker also to fix when something happens. So I think there, of course, the risks are a little bit lower.
Thank you very much. And Peter, just I will compensate by giving you two questions.
Great.
And I think another thing that you have mentioned also is I think you would have 2 more hours or dedicated session. We could definitely look into the shadow fleets, because I think in near to medium term, I'm very happy that new sanctions package for the first time includes LNG, but the shadow fleet is definitely going to be a headache in the months to come. If we are switching the gears on focusing the industry, which of course you are interfacing, most of course Czechia is the automotive industry hub of Central and Eastern Europe. So, and you have the first-hand exposure to the off-takers, but also the project developers. From your perspective, could you please reflect on the policy instruments that are already in the place, or you see that they have really high potential for lowering the capex for electrification, the fuel switch, PPAs, CFDs, green public procurement. And the second part of it is, we have heard a lot of times another buzzword is innovation, of course, and I think we have to really capitalize into as much as possible. We know that Europe is doing spectacularly well on R&D stage, but when it comes to the demonstration and the commercialization, then the startups, the clean tech startups are moving elsewhere because there is no enabling environment for them. So could you square those policy instruments, and how do you see innovation helping to boost the clean tech in Europe?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those questions. And exactly as you framed it in the beginning, especially Czech Republic, but also Slovakia, we are industrial countries having the automotive, steel industry, chemicals, all the other energy intense industries, we are also an exporters, one of the most open economies to frame where our position is. And I absolutely agree that all the policies you mentioned, being it contract for differences, being it PPAs, green public procurement, it all would help. And I just would love to see those things happen as soon as possible, so we see that this is not the only answer we need. And I will try to explain why. I do believe that we need to go further. From our perspective as an industrial country, we need to rethink the energy mix again. We need to admit that next to renewables, which are extremely important, and I'm a big advocate of renewables in our country, Europe needs more of nuclear energy. Europe needs to be able to decrease the energy prices. We need gas. We will need gas. Because if you see on the forecasts of the energy agency, the amount of electricity which we will need will be enormous because of all the data centers, etc. Just a couple of hours ago, it was the Financial Times, I think, who issued an article that China is lowering the energy prices for data centers by 50%. That's an example of a different part of the world, different part which is a competitor to us. Another example, internal example from European Union, Germany is now considering or preparing a guaranteed power price of 50 euros for megawatt hour for energy intensive companies. I'm using these examples to show that the world has really changed, and the old policies which we are considering might not be enough. We need to keep the level playing field within EU, and we have experience from the last couple of years when some of the member states went further and supported more. I have an understanding for them. They are fighting for their companies. But then for the others, it's more difficult. At the same time, the rest of the world is not waiting for us. And I think we really need to do much deeper changes and to admit things which were not possible to talk about or discuss a couple of years ago. Because from the perspective of the Czech company, electrification works for many sectors, definitely. But if the electricity price or energy price is affordable, right now, if we have like twice as higher electricity prices than in the US and 4 times higher of gas prices compared to US, for heavy industry companies and for their investment cycles, why they would switch, why would they electrify their product facilities? Because the investment cycle for refineries, for furnaces, we have like 1, 2, maybe 3 investment cycles till 2050 when we want to be climate neutral. So companies need to really think ahead, 10 years ahead, to do some investments or to do not. And why would they commit to the new clean technology if they would lose the competitiveness even more than they has been losing in last 2 decades? And remember that the GDP gap between us and the United States doubled in last, I think, 15 years. But maybe to mention what is specific to Czech Republic is that electrification projects are delayed in our countries because of lack of grid capacity. This is something what is really typical, I think, for us, and because it takes years for planning, for all the permits which we need to have. So if we want to do a more effective decarbonization in our countries, we need to, the planning must include the grid capacity planning from the very, very beginning, because this is delaying us for definitely for years. And there are more problems, like, companies, energy producers, they are holding the unused reserved capacity because they don't know what our situation will look like. So they are holding the capacity and blocking new connections. So that's maybe another example. But so that's probably an answer, at least for the first question. And remind me the second one, please.
About the innovation. We are good at R&D, but demonstration and scale up, we often see the companies going elsewhere. How we maintain momentum in Europe?
Yeah. I don't want to repeat everything what is being said on a daily basis around the Draghi report, but I simply need to touch again the fact that Europe is missing the capital market, definitely. So any ideas which comes in Europe or emerge in Europe's, especially for scale-ups, there is not enough money in Europe. The pension funds are not used enough for this critical type of investment. So I still do believe that even for the whole decarbonization, creating a single market and a capital market would be more effective policy than focusing on some specific, partial regulations, which we see in the last couple of years. Another aspect, look whom we are fighting and how the other players, world players, which cards they are playing. I'm pointing to the fact that we have a pretty good R&D, but we are unable to protect ourselves against unfair competition from another geopolitical parts of the world, and this is something what Europe needs to start learning how to protect the R&D outputs and innovations which are being created in Europe.
Just a very quick follow-up question, rather curious. As I work a lot with the industries in Central and Eastern Europe, one thing I'm hearing is that industries don't love CBAM as much as European Commission tries to think about. What is your perception, and what are you hearing from the industrial players in Czechia?
Thanks for the question. Actually, we have been supporters of the CBAM principle, definitely, because the price premium which European companies are paying for CO2, it has been simply unfair that our competitors from the rest of the world are not paying that. So until now, the general CBAM idea was really good. However, some elements of the CBAM were not designed ideally from our perspective. For example, the producers from the European Union, they currently receive part of the emission allowances for free, and this free allocation should phase out according to current plans once the CBAM is introduced. It's like an exchange. You will have a CBAM, and then we cut your free allowances, which sounds logical. But I will give you a concrete example why we don't believe it's working and why the phase out should be postponed until the CBAM is changed. Let's take a producer from the third country out of EU, and the producer has the share of the clean energy, let's say only 10% or 15%. The rest is, the producer is remaining on the fossil fuels. But on paper, this producer will attribute this 10 or 15% of the clean energy to the share of exports to the EU. So he creates a theory where this 15% of this production, covered by 15% of electricity, this is this 15% which goes to the EU. So at that moment, there is no CBAM, there is no tax, because this producer was allowed to say that this 15%, it goes directly to the EU, virtually. While, of course, the remaining 85%, the costs are much lower because the producer should not keep the same regulation as European companies has to do. So once the Czech industrial companies and exporter on the third markets, we are totally disadvantaged. And we will be disadvantaged twice more because then the free allowances will be cut. So that's why it creates so much emotions in our country that the current CBAM mechanism or scheme is not working for the exporters.
Thank you very much. I think we have probably 5 more minutes. Oh, exactly. I guessed it right. Any questions from the audience? Please also introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Nikolai. I cover European energy policy from Concito, a think tank. Question to Helen in particular. You talk about grids and the need to invest in grids, and it's imperative for European security. Looking at the European Commission analysis, Europe needs to double its grid investments from around 50, 60 billion euros annually to 100, 120 maybe. If you look at the 1.5% of the NATO commitments, that would more than satisfy that investment need. Actually, spending just half of 1.5% would cover that investment annually. Do you recommend, and maybe also the other speakers, to focus a share of the 1.5% on electricity grids, given the imperative for European security and other benefits, as you highlighted? Thank you.
I can start. I think it's interesting with what came out of the NATO summit in June with the 1.5% that I experienced many energy companies, especially, being very, very interested in what the 1.5% will actually be going to. My impression is a little bit that it's not necessarily that there will be a ton of new investments using these 1.5%. I think a lot of countries will be looking at what are we already planning, what are we already doing, and how does that how can that be part of living up to the 1.5%. So it's I mean, I think my guess is as good as yours on whether will be a priority. I think we're hearing that energy infrastructure is going to be a priority. Like I said, I think a lot of countries have realized that there is a security imperative here. And besides the security imperative, the added benefit when it comes to exactly updating the grid, as yes, my co-panelist here said, look, we have a huge issue in Europe when it comes to the grid, where I mean, even the case of, I think it's in the case of Germany, where there's a complete disconnect about where the renewable energy is produced and where it's actually needed. The tricky thing, of course, is to actually get those investments going, and there's a bit of a sometimes a chicken and egg problem here, that grid sort of operators don't dare to expand the grid until they know there's the demand, and those that have the demand, of course, are waiting for these expansions. I think that's maybe where I'll leave it for now.
No, I think there is big risk when I talk about Estonian perspective to really keep this 1.5% of NATO commitment very vague, that you could put everything under it, like the interconnectors, roads, bridges. So we have launched our own this kind of national review now on what could be the good methodology, and how we would approach it still would be that the grid as such is more a competitiveness issue. It's an issue of the energy price. It's the issue of the can you meet the demand, etc. So that I don't think should be the part of the 1.5%. What should be part of 1.5% is the additional investments what are done for a really this kind of making the grid more safer in terms of the countering the hybrid attacks. It's basically it can be physical measures on the what you can use for the ensuring trafos and grids and all that. It can be also more hybrid ICT type of cyber attack investments, etc. And this, of course, should be part of this 1.5%, but not the grid itself.
But would you like to also reflect?
Actually, yes. Maybe a general comment on the necessity of investments in defense and in decarbonization, etc. It all increases the pressure on the state budgets, on the EU budget, of course, and it all increases the pressure on people's wallets through the taxes, etc., etc. And I really do believe that especially in decarbonization, but it's connected, the resilience aspect and lowering the dependence on Russian oil and everything. We need to focus on how to remove the green premium, how to decrease the prices. Because in the past, the fight with the climate, what were the main arguments, or how it was explained? It was explained through the emotion of fear. There is a global warming with all the things which it brings, and they are really dangerous. But it was to some extent driven by fear. It was driven by moral appeals. We need to do something because it's our duty, etc., etc., and by regulation. Those were basically those three elements of how we were explaining, and I really think that we need to shift it towards more larger focus on innovations and larger focus on decreasing the green premium, because then it will work. It was visible in this essay of Bill Gates, which was issued, I think, last week or a couple of days ago. I don't believe that people like Bill Gates changed their view or suddenly, start using different arguments. They just see that there is a lowering willingness of a public to bear the costs. So if one doors are a bit more closed because of the populist politicians, because of the concrete government which is running some countries, then still others are open, and we need to try to find more doors which are open, which would be accepted by public, and which would lead to the goals which we have in front of us.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. Please join me in applauding our wonderful panelists. So now we are heading to coffee break, I think for 10 or 15 minutes. And the following session will be on securing Europe's position in the global technology race. So stay tuned.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session will start in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session will start in 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session is about to start.
All right. Want some water? Design, beautiful design. Yes, exactly. Good afternoon, everyone. I assume that everyone else is still getting their coffee and they will be back momentarily, but we're going to get started out of respect for all of your time. My name is Scott Young. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives at Eurasia Group, the geopolitical risk advisory firm. Thank you so much to Robert and the team at GLOBSEC, also Think Tank Europa, and the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs for hosting this timely and important conversation. When we say timely and important, this session, which will have about an hour to 55 minutes to do, is about closing the gap, securing Europe's position in the global technology race. I'm joined today by a very distinguished panel. I'll introduce them in turn. On my immediate right, we have Josip Prusha, the CEO and founder of Prusha Research. Next to him is David McAwee, the CEO of All Digital. Heather Deserud is next, Director of Communications with the NATO Defense Innovation Accelerator of the North Atlantic.
Well done.
Did I get that right? Okay, great. And last but certainly not least, Casper Klinge, the Vice President for Government Partnerships and Public Policy with Zscaler, the American tech company. Also, for everyone in this room, they will know him as a former Danish tech ambassador posted to Silicon Valley. So thank you so much for joining us and joining this conversation. Just to help set a preamble for this session, I'll do literally 30 seconds of introduction before we get to the questions. But really for this panel, I think to help set the stage, the one thing that Europe has always been very, very good at is admiring the problem. There's nothing about the Draghi report that was all that new. Having a capital markets union did not start 2 years ago. That idea has existed for at least 2 decades. None of this is radical. None of us is being undiagnosed. None of us has been something that has shown up since COVID or since the beginning of the Ukraine war. All of it has been known for at least decades. But fortunately, we have the panel here today who will solve all of that in the next 15 minutes. So you are very lucky. To begin, what is the real problem? What is the diagnosis? I want to spend most of our time today on solutions, but before we get to that, the main thing is the main thing. What is the real problem here? Does Europe actually have an innovation problem, or is it a scale-up problem? And is Europe just a fishing pond for US and Chinese investors? So I'm going to go right down the line, from starting with Casper coming towards me. What is the real problem that we're solving here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's good to be in a panel where there are as many people in the audience as there are in the panel. And the thing about people getting coffee and coming, I don't think that will happen, but it's great to be on the list, Casper. Listen, I think Europe does have a problem. I think, when you dig into some of the data sets, and there are people on this panel that know more about this than I do, when you look at the number of patents, the educational level, there's really nothing to be, shy of in Europe. Is a scalability. And as Draghi points out, and we promised you as we prepared for this panel that we wouldn't repeat everything in the Draghi report because that's been done so many times before. But I think the main problem, and I'll say something a little bit controversial representing a US technology company in Europe, I don't think the main problem is actually regulations or red tape. The main problem is the lack of an internal market that makes it possible for companies to scale in Europe. And that is why I think, especially on the technology front, Europe is lacking dramatically behind. And being a former diplomat, I'll be my normal pessimistic self in saying that there are no immediate remedies to make sure that Europe will catch up. And if I may just say one point, because there's been a lot of focus on the green transition, and there is this, at least in Denmark, a new love for industrial policies, picking the winners, helping using state funds to subsidize, the technology sector. And I'm deeply critical on that because I think one of Europe's problem is how do you pick the winners, and does that come with a national tag rather than sort of altruism across Europe? I think that's going to be difficult. I think one of the main differences between back in the 70s when we had the oil crisis, when subsidies was a good idea, is that there was no existing market back then for renewable energy. Today, you want to use subsidies on an existing market to create competitors on cloud or artificial intelligence. I think that's a completely different ballgame, and I think it would be dangerous for Europe to go down that road.
Great, Casper, thank you for setting us off on a very positive note. Heather, what is the real problem?
I hate to start a panel by the cliche of violently agreeing with my panelists, but I am going to do that. I do think scalability is a significant issue here. You have the resources in Europe, you have the ideas, you have the talent, you have the infrastructure, you've got the funding from government, so you've got an excellent GERD ratio, you've got the universities funneling that into the system, so that can't be the problem. The problem has to be what happens once that company starts up and starts to scale. I think you see a lot of discussion around mechanism, around the types of capital investments that we need, and it's not about, in my opinion, the mechanism, it's about having that culture of risk, being ready for startups to fail. That's part of the system, and that should be encouraged, and it should be rewarded by continued investment. It shouldn't be something that we're afraid of in the European market. And so I think that we need to be looking at the ways that we can encourage that risk-taking, that patient capital, that longer-term approach, while also understanding that we do have very real needs, especially within the NATO system.
Great. David?
I'll do the opposite. I'll contradict with you.
Okay, great.
I hope you don't mind. No, I don't think that actually Europe has a lot of talent. I think that we have the people, a lot of people, but when I see the stats say that 44% of our European citizens are missing digital skills. So that's half of the population which can never be a kind of a client, a user, or even an SME funder to be able to kind of contribute to the economy, to the competitiveness. So I think that we're investing a lot of things in innovation. We should invest as well in capabilities, in skills. And that's what I see as being the problem for Europe at this stage, is having more skills will help us being a bit more less risk averse, as we are indeed. It was written in Mario report, and therefore having more people to kind of be early adopters of the different technologies and different products that we want to put on the market, or different SMEs that we could start. So I would say skills.
Skills gap, great. Joseph?
So we are always talking that we need to innovate, and we certainly can. But I have to say, it is I think of it as a coping mechanism before we can actually be on the same level playing field. So I am in 3D printing industry, so I will use an example from our industry. So we are the largest manufacturer in Europe, but we are also the last man standing, because 5 years ago, Chinese decided that 3D printing is going to be a strategic industry. And how can we compete when and innovate? How can we have time and breathe room to innovate and push stuff out there if our competition can sell the machines below the price of the parts? So we need to level out the playing field, and then we need to innovate.
When you say level out the playing field, what does that mean for you?
I mean, in a way that if we always talk about having a free market, but that also means that everybody should have the same same options, and if somebody is propped up by a state, it should be leveled out.
Now, I'm going to hold you accountable on that last point. Should be is great. It's beautiful. Must be. How would you convince Xi Jinping that he doesn't get to invest in companies that are Chinese?
Well, I don't think that is a game we can win. But
so how do we win that game then?
I think when
because I see two doors. No, door one is convince Xi Jinping not to back Chinese companies. Door two is
I was going to say we can go in a way. There's basically a blueprint. If you look, for example, Made in China 2025. Yep. There are some extremely smart ideas how to promote the businesses, and that may be one of the ways to leveling out the playing field.
Great. Do you think Europe is willing to? I'm holding you on this point because I think it's a really key one. Do you think Europe has the pockets and the political will to do that?
I think it doesn't have to be hundreds of billions.
Great. That's great news.
I remember, I bootstrapped my company from 10,000 euros. My father lended me, and now we are over 750 billion euros or something like that.
So I like how after 500 billion, you just lose count. You're like, it doesn't matter. It's something above 750 billion. Great. Okay. So I think the panel, you've diagnosed the problem. You've identified different challenges and gaps that Europe is facing. Turning to the future and looking at, there are technologies that matter more than other technologies. There are technologies that are derivative of built on the back of 5G. They're built on the back of chips. They're built on the back of critical minerals. I just want to spend a few moments on what I would describe as foundational technologies. Foundational technologies being quantum, biotech. You can include semiconductors in that. You can include critical minerals. But what can and should Europe, in your view, given that we're in the capital of one of Europe's leading economies, what can and should Europe be doing to ensure that the next foundational tech unicorn happens here and not in Silicon Valley? I'm going to start with the man who works for the company from Silicon Valley.
I think that's a super difficult question to actually answer in a positive way, because I think when you look at the foundational technologies, and I would actually throw even cloud computing into that, because I think, whether you work in pharmaceuticals or in other, industries, that is going to be foundational. Artificial intelligence, I would say the same. And then the question is around quantum, when that is coming. I think, when you look at the European market right now, when you look at some of these technologies, it's crystal clear that most of it is not European. I think that's one of the reasons why you have this push for, digital sovereignty that is really picking up pace in Europe. And even though I work for a US technology company, I'm very much a European, as you can hear from my accent. So I understand the concerns in Europe, because I think one of the big questions is whether this dependency is actually also creating a dependency on the value creation. In other words, if you use foundational technologies, even cloud computing, do you gain the full benefit, the full added value when you are a European company in this space? And I think the jury is still out on that. So the question is, how do you make sure that we gather pace on that? And I actually think there are really legitimate reasons why Europe is trying to find out what digital sovereignty means in practice. We have Germany and France convening a meeting on the 18th of November in Berlin to try and, I think, take this rather theoretical, conceptual notion of sovereignty and making a bit more operation. Because I think the big issue is, how do you make sure the value creation builds upon the foundational technology, so it's not only the big hyperscalers or the big technology companies that will really benefit in the digital age. And I think there are ways of doing it. One of them, and that might be a little bit controversial to say here, Scott, but I think one of them will also come from regulations to make sure you have demands on the technology companies, so they have technology transfer to Europe. They make sure that data sets remain in Europe or with the companies, with the clients they serve, rather than it's something you can innovate on the basis of. And then I think, we might come back to the geopolitical fragmentation we're in the middle of right now. I think, the private sector, including the company I work for, we have a particular responsibility to be, I would say, the custodians of the transatlantic relationship and make sure that our technology innovates to give Europe digital sovereignty so that Europe doesn't fall behind in the digital decade ahead. And I think there are real concerns that will happen. And I think the companies need to be held responsible and to account for making that happen also in Europe.
Now, you mentioned the tech companies and Europe compelling them to sort of onshore, at least bring to Europe the data sets, some of the technology, some of the data centers. When it comes to leverage, what leverage does Europe have, other than its consumer market, other than the fact that it has 470 odd citizens?
But I think the market plays a role. If we look at my own company, it's a relevant place to do business. It's a place that is safe. There is still trust in technology. So of course the European market is there. But I think there are also bigger external enemies, if we look at it from a global scale, that makes it necessary for North America and Europe to pull together and to work together also in technology. And representative from NATO and Diana is a good example on why that is the case. So I think, transferring that sense of responsibility to the tech industry and to political leaders at the same time, especially when the political partnership is not what it used to be, I think that's a way forward to making sure that we stick together and the values that we created across the Atlantic, they will remain important also in the next decade.
Great, thanks. Heather, David, Josef, do you want to come in on that question of how do we ensure the next foundational tech unicorn happens in Europe?
Can I ask you to repeat the foundational technologies again?
Robotics, 3D printing.
Okay,
yes.
So Thank you, because I really feel that the 3D printing is absolutely vital for making anything physical. You now cannot make new physical products, and I think we all agree that we should make the stuff we use, or at least should have the capability. And it also can replace some of the manufacturing technologies we've lost over the decades of offshoring the manufacturing. Those people are retired, and now you cannot restart those factories; they are long gone. And with 3D printing, we are an example. We have a 1,000 printer farm where we make new parts which are production grade, can run. But now, we are on the verge of, losing the edge in this technology. Obviously, we are doing well, but the pressure, we are not fighting with competition. We are fighting with the government now.
Which government?
The Chinese government.
Chinese, I see. Okay.
And when I'm speaking with founders now, they cannot get investors if they want to start a new 3D printing company, because the business case now does not make sense, and it works for us just because I do it for 16 years now. So I think we really need to treasure these technologies, what we have here, and work that we can expand and build on them. This is like the strong foundation.
Right. And so what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that additive manufacturing, 3D printing, has the potential to completely reshape supply chains when we're talking about this geopolitical fragmentation that Casper alluded to.
I think it's our best shot to be able to restart manufacturing locally again.
Right.
Joseph, I want to actually take you as an example. I mean, at All Digital, we're training people to get digital skills. Last year, we trained 2.5 million people. Out of those 2.5 million people that we're training every year, there is probably a Joseph. There's probably a funder that will kind of create the next unicorn. And so that's, for me, is the first key. It's a people job. It's a people business. If we want to create new startups, we need to have people creating those startups. We have to have people having the skills to be able to create them. That's the first step. Second step is we need to have a market so that we can sell 3D printer or any other products that we have. So if I was in your shoes, actually, and I'm not, and I don't want to be, I would actually look into how can I make sure that the people that are not touching currently, and that's the case for all of you, how can I make sure that the audience, the market are not touching currently, are awakened to that kind of technology, awakened to that kind of products that I want to sell and that I want to put on the markets. Do they have the skills to use it, to understand it? Do they have the fear? And do they have the confidence? These kind of things. That would be second proposal is work with competence centers in your area, in your region, in your markets to help them build up the market, the users that you need to. And the third level is probably some of you are doing that already. I was doing that in previous life when I was in corporate business. Work with universities to be able to grow up the talents that you need into your organizations. Because to be able to grow your organization is not enough to have just a beautiful and great funder. You also need to have the people that will take the lead afterward and to be able to kind of create the new ideas. And these people will be coming from universities, will be coming from sometimes it's adults that kind of detach themselves from the pace of technology and pace of innovation, and you want to reconnect them into that. And by reconnecting them, then you make great talents that can get the experience from street and get that into your company. So you're asking for 3 very specific ideas, Scott. These are 3 specific ideas that we can do every day.
Every day. Well, I'm very, very happy to hear that, David.
Can I jump in?
Please, Heather.
So one thing I think that we need to be aware of as well is that ability to be creative, and that involves risk and play and not understanding what the destiny is going to be. So I was in Silicon Valley a few weeks ago, and I was struck by how open investors were there to, we don't know what the answer is going to be. This person has an interesting idea. Who knows where it's going to go, but we're going to invest because we like the person, and we think that person has something to them. And I think that's something that we're missing in the European discussions, in the British discussions. What is it that ultimate product is going to be isn't actually the point. The point is, can we invest in this team because they're going to generate a bunch of different ideas, some of which may come to fruition and may be valuable for us.
So we don't like people in Europe, is that what you're saying? Or?
Your words, not mine.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I understood.
All right, I want to take a slight left turn. Casper, I'm coming back to what you raised around the geopolitical fragmentation. As everyone in this room is very aware, there is a war in Europe, a land war in Europe right now, and that has driven a surge in appetite for defense technologies. However, there are still significant and severe barriers to investing in dual-use technologies, whether it be unwillingness or be ESG requirements, but there seems to be at this time a reckoning around what Europe is willing to do when it comes to rearmament, when it comes to security, defense, and resilience. And so my question for all of you, and I'm not going to make all of you answer this, so those of you that are willing to answer can jump in. But what opportunity does this this geopolitical moment and this situation in Ukraine mean when it comes to European tech? Is it an opportunity or not?
Me first.
You first.
So I think, again, if you read the infamous Draghi report, of course, there's a lot of focus on technology, a lot of focus on digitalization. I think where the report perhaps doesn't make a sufficient distinction is between, defense technology and digitalization technology writ large. Because I'm actually a little bit more optimistic when it comes to defense technology, and I'll refer to NATO to undermine what I'm saying now. I think Europe has more to offer when it comes to defense technology. We have companies here that are competitive at the global scale. I think the opportunity that you mentioned, Scott, is that of course a lot of money are now pouring into this area, which means that there are a lot of opportunities for European companies to do more. Working for a US technology company in Europe right now is less fun than it was a year ago, let me be honest. But I actually think, what we've seen also lately is that a lot of the big investments, including from countries, are now going to European companies rather than only US technology companies. So I think there is an opportunity there to be made. I think, I'm not an expert on this, but I think around dual use, there is also a political appetite for reducing the complexity and making it a bit more possible to draw in the private sector. I mean, when I had the opportunity to live in Silicon Valley for a couple of years, I mean, one of my favorite examples to take with me back home was actually the Defense Innovation Unit in Mountain View in Silicon Valley that I'm sure NATO is well aware of. Because what they did, which was very different compared to how you traditionally bought military equipment, was to say, they put out a tender for a problem rather than for a specific solution. So not saying we need an aircraft with these specific requirements. They said, we need something to be able to solve this problem. And that meant that a lot of the private sector technology companies in Silicon Valley said, well, hold on, it might be relevant for us to work with Pentagon, although we thought we were going to do something completely different. I think that's something we can be inspired from and with here in Europe. I'm much more pessimistic when it comes to digitalization and technology, and I'm sorry to say that working for a US technology company, if we just look at the company I work for, and this is, I'm sure, very unwise of me to say, we fundamentally don't have any European competitors in the cybersecurity domain. We have many European cybersecurity companies, but they work in a very vertical, very niche market. When it comes to global cybersecurity companies that provide the full cybersecurity suite, the full threat intelligence at the global scale, there are really no European competitors. I don't think that's great, but I think it says a little bit about Europe's challenges in this area. And that goes back to my point before. How do we change that? Well, one of the first things you need to do is to make sure that the companies that provide this technology will do it in a responsible way. We do not store customer content. We give full control to our customers. We make sure the business continuity is out there, even if there's something dramatic happening, a sea cable being cut, or a political development, a la what we saw in the Netherlands around the International Criminal Court and the discontinuation of email systems. That is something European customers are requiring. I think that's part of sovereignty, and fundamentally it's also part of making Europe competitive.
Thanks, Kasper. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that traditionally dual use has been military applications then being repurposed for civilian applications. And with the current technology and where the innovation is happening right now, you're seeing the complete reversal of that, where you're seeing non-military applications being repurposed for defense purposes. Heather,
Yes, I'm
dual
really,
use,
really
dual use
glad that you've brought
technologies.
this up. I think dual use technology is such an interesting buzzword that people throw around a lot. But what NATO did in creating Diana a few years ago, and just for those who don't know what Diana is, we were created by NATO to work with startup companies and bring them into the defense system. So find more agile ways to work with innovation across defense. Dual use is an incredibly important part of what we were founded to do. And it's not about buzzwords. It's not about avoiding regulations with certain VCs. It's about ensuring that companies are competitive, that they have commercial markets, while also looking to sell into defense. And so rather than relying entirely on a defense contract or on government funding, these companies have customers, they're able to grow and scale, and they're ready whenever we do need them. We can't predict exactly how we're going to need any sort of specific technology or capability in the next 10 years. Look at how quickly things are changing with Ukraine. But having that capability and having that innovation ecosystem that's primed and ready to respond regardless of what that threat is, that's what dual use really means to us. And so being able to invest in companies at the early stage, help them understand what a defense use case might be so that they are building toward that whilst they're also pursuing their commercial opportunity. That's what Diana is trying to work on. And I think that Europe is incredibly strong on that front. We have so many companies that are applying to us from every nation within Europe or within the NATO infrastructure who want to work on these things. And so coming back to an earlier point about, what would incentivize people to actually want to be restricted from, taking investments from China, for example, or ensuring that they're thinking about values rather than strategic competitors. I think that's already there. There already is a lot of values-based decision-making happening within these startup companies. They want to contribute to society. It's not just about 10x, it's about, what they can actually do for the world. And they're coming to us in droves, and we're not able to take everyone. So I think there's an incredible supply. It's about matching that supply to the demand.
David.
Yeah, I think that cybersecurity also start with the people, and young and younger every day. And so I think that is also a role for authorities, institutions, education, formal education, non-formal education to play here, which is to educate our citizens about cybersecurity, about don't click, don't open, and those kind of very basic things that many people don't even do. And so I think there's a role for authorities there. I think there's also a role for corporations, industries to be able to kind of help the authorities, help the education sector in that domain, which is a domain which is quite complex, quite technical, very much. Most of them don't have the skills to do that, don't have the knowledge to do that, don't have the people to be able to give those kind of trainings. And so it's probably a role where, big corporate can help in hopefully European corporate, but maybe let's not be a sectorist, and maybe US corporate as well, to really help educate our population to defend themselves against cyber war, which we are seeing those days.
Great. Do you want to come to this question of dual use?
I love the way how you said that it switched the other way around, that it starts with consumer great stuff and then goes to defense, because and the testament of that is that I got to chat with President Zelensky about how we should improve our machines so they can be of more use and easier to use for them.
What was the answer? How can you improve your machines to better support?
Sorry, my brain, when I was preparing for this, I was like, okay, it needs to be more rugged. It needs to be, there needs to be a filtration system, etc., etc. But the answer was that the printer should speak Ukrainian.
Okay, a Ukrainian-speaking printer.
And we delivered in a week.
1 week. Well, there's European innovation there, right there. Casper, yeah.
Scott, can I just make a point to what you stated before? And it was very kind of you to say that American companies should also be involved in the party. I'll share something from my own world, which I think is very interesting, how the political fragmentation across the Atlantic is now having a direct impact on how European organizations, private or public, are now trying to defend themselves. Because of the uncertainty and the lack of trust across the Atlantic, there is also a lack of trust in US technology. This is not rocket science, everybody in this room is aware of it, but it actually means when it comes to cybersecurity that organizations in this country, across the other 26 member states, are either deciding not to use state-of-the-art technology or postponing decisions to invest in state-of-the-art technology, which means getting rid of legacy equipment at a moment where, sorry to say this is not rocket science either, the threat from cybersecurity is going through the roof. Of course, there's a lot of focus on territorial integrity and traditional warfare, but with very few exceptions, the majority of European countries should be more concerned about cybersecurity threats than they should about territorial disputes in the traditional way. But the problem right now with the transatlantic lack of trust is we are seeing cybersecurity not being up to standard because of what is happening across the Atlantic. I think that is something we should focus on as well, because that is a real vulnerability for European organizations, and unfortunately we can throw some data sets from our own company into the mix here. In some industries, we've seen just in the last year, for example, in the energy sector, a 900% increase year on year when it comes to ransomware attacks in the energy sector. So this is not a theoretical threat. This is really real. And it's one of the areas where, as a transatlantic person, I'm deeply concerned about how we are seeing, politics unfold. on both sides of the Atlantic, but the real consequences, ramifications for cybersecurity at a moment where we are under attack on a daily basis. So another happy note to you. Here you go, Scott. Thank
you, Casper. You are bringing the whole panel up. I really appreciate it. Just a reminder for our audience that we're going to be going to audience questions in about 10 minutes. So please prepare them diligently in 10 minutes. So we'll come to you in just a moment. But before we get there, I wanted to ask my panel, what is the next big thing that you think Europe needs to be focusing on when it comes to capturing the value chain, or capturing the supply chain? What is that next technology? So not AI. I think Europe, has missed the boat a little bit on foundational technology, with the one exception for the Dutch that are here of ASML. But the answer is not AI, but it may not be critical minerals processing. But what is the next technology that Europe should be leaning in on when it comes to this matters? This is super important, and Europe needs to make sure it has a seat at the table. Start with you, Josef.
Oh my. So obviously 3D printing, but I think
shocked.
No, I guess that is why I was invited here, right? But I think you touch on ASML. I think there needs to be a lot of fabs made. I think we have a history in Czechia, for example, and then there I think Onsemi is building a new one. And it's not just about the high tech, like 2 nanometer EUV or the higher technologies. It's the stuff which runs your everyday life is not all that 2 nanometer chip.
So the legacy chips. You're saying we don't need to worry about 2 nanometers. We should focus on 28 nanometers.
No, I think it is a little bit. I think it is a little bit. How to say it? Not talk much about it. And but there's a lot of details because we manufacture the electronics in house, but we had to build everything. And for example, PCB manufacturing is the when you have the printed circuit board, the base, you put the parts on and solder it on. There's also a big push, and the manufacturers are dying.
Right, because what you're saying is we don't need a 2 nanometer chip to run a vacuum cleaner. We just need a 28 nanometer chip.
Okay, yeah.
When it comes to and we'll come down the line in just a moment on what the next big thing for Europe has to be, but I'm going to stay with you for a second, Josef. When it comes to Prusa Research's supply chain, where is it, and what keeps you up at night? Is it in Europe? Is it in Czechia, or is it global?
So we've been working on bringing it home quite a lot over the last few years. So we make most in Czech Republic, then we make some stuff around Europe. But there are still some parts we get from China, even though we have suppliers on the line. For example, on motors, we have suppliers in Japan, but motors are big problem in the supply chain because nobody can make enough of them and at reasonable price for us. So we are thinking about building a new factory like we did many times before.
So when you hear about the trade war escalating between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, you're not so worried?
Well, that should worry everyone because I mean, if people are scared, what will happen? They don't buy stuff, and that is what makes the economy stick. I think.
David, next big technology that Europe needs to focus on.
Look, I'm not an expert in 28 millimeter chips, honestly, but I will contradict you, Scott. I do think that Europe cannot afford to miss the train of AI. And luckily, that's a long train. There's a lot of wagons there. So there's a lot of opportunities. I think that not only in terms of being a builder of AI, I mean, there's Mistral in France, there's plenty of others that actually are not that bad and can still win the race, but also in kind of using it. And there's something that we have in Europe which nobody understands, which is languages. And so languages, AI is a great tool to help us bridge the languages and make Europe a bit more unified and therefore stronger. So I think that if we manage to use AI to make bridges between countries and make big bridges between regions and populations, the ones that are a bit more high-tech and the ones that are a bit less high-tech and want to talk to someone in a very natural languages, I think that AI can be extremely helpful for us. And I think that AI can be needed for us. And therefore, I don't think we can miss that one. I would.
That is very true. That is very true.
That's how you build a Ukrainian-speaking 3D printer in a week.
Exactly. Exactly.
Heather.
Picking up on that, we actually have a company within the current Diana cohort which is working on exactly that. So using AI to translate languages, but in an offline scenario. So you could use it in the field or doing medical issues, things like that. But I think you're right. I think it's not about missing the boat on foundational technologies. It's about the implementation of those technologies. And it's very easy to say, oh, well, someone's already figured out AI. We should just move on. But if you can apply that to all the different use cases we're talking about, I mean, we're using it for things like subsea protection. We're using AI for, there's an airship that just went up using AI, which, I mean, doesn't sound incredibly new, but it is a new way of applying AI. That's important, and that is going to lead to those investments within the European system. So I think that's really important. And I also think that this thread about China is really key as well. So understanding that we are in a situation where we've got strategic competitors, we're not at war with everyone, but we are in a situation where we need to be aware of where our supply is coming from. And so developing alternatives to traditional critical mineral use or to other supplies that we're going to be needing. An example would be, the silver paste that's used in solar panels. 90% of that comes from China. So what are we doing to ensure that we can be looking at alternatives to continue to be building a green growth future without relying on one strategic competitor?
Casper, foundational technology for Europe.
Yeah, listen, I could do what many others normally do, sort of talk about quantum computing as the big, but the honest answer is I have no idea, around quantum. And when I speak to the engineers inside my company, they don't have a clear answer on that as well. I mean, I studied political science under Lykke Friis, so nobody should ask me about what the next technology is going to be and believe what I'm going to say. What I would say, though, and picking up a little bit on what others have said around artificial intelligence, I think there has been tremendous focus in Europe, but elsewhere on the productivity gains, coming from AI. I used to work for another company. I think some of those companies have been incredibly gifted in creating a big hype around artificial intelligence and how everybody was losing the train, was moving so quickly. If you didn't jump on it, you would lose your competitive edge. I think when you look at some of the studies that are currently out, the productivity gains are not what everybody thought they would be right now. I'm not saying this to say that the technology will not pick up pace, because I think it will when these systems mature. But I think one area where a lot of countries, but also Europe, has focused too little is around protecting those organizations. And of course, I'm a bit biased working for a cybersecurity company, but when we look at how artificial intelligence have changed, just how we work with customers. We run the biggest security cloud in the world. We've seen a 36x increase because of the arrival of large language models and machine learning. What we've seen is that 60% of that traffic is blocked because of security risks coming from some cybersecurity attacks. So I think the point that you made is the right one. There are a lot of opportunities around AI, but you cannot reap the benefits of those opportunities if you do not have a secure system that you can trust as a company, as an organization, or as an employee, or as a citizen. So I think that's where we need to balance a little bit out the way ahead. So a completely objective point about how cybersecurity is very important for artificial intelligence as well.
It's funny, Casper, because I actually thought you were going in a different direction when you're saying we need to protect. I mean, automation killed a lot of blue-collar jobs.
Yeah.
I think it's the white-collar jobs that we need to protect, this population that we need to protect, and find a way to use AI without killing jobs, or at least without killing wealth being well distributed. So finding a way to distribute the wealth that is created by this new form of automation. That's another way of security.
Yeah.
Joseph?
I wanted to say a lot of the times when we speak about the AI, it is like, oh my God, we lost the race. I do not think that is the case, because there's just one technology, the transformers, which went like this. But now we have the infrastructure. It doesn't matter if it's right here, but you can rent huge GPU farms. If somebody finds a new idea how to do the LLMs, there's a ton of data, a ton of GPUs, and they can have something working in just a couple of months. So the today's craze enabled the infrastructure to really quickly get the new ideas out to the production level scale. And I have to say, I'm very positive on AI. I want to give a shout out to Mistral from France. I actually fine-tuned that model myself a couple of times, and I would say it is on the world-class level.
Can I just
please
one more thing? I'm going to come back to my medieval literature background here, so apologies to everyone in the room. when the printing press was debuted, I mean, you could say, oh, well, the printing press has already been created. You know, we've missed the boat. We can't possibly get on board. That's just not the reality of how technology works. We're in the adoption phase. We're in the early adoption phase. It's going to be fully implemented across all of society. It doesn't matter whether we're first or last. We have to be on board. We have to be ready to work with AI, with quantum, be able to work in a post-quantum world. It's not enough to say we weren't the first. We still have to be the best at developing it.
Right. And I should be quite clear that I am long-term bullish on AI with hiccups along the way. So question for the panel, given that AI has come up and sort of, it's like the elephant in the room, you can never avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Should Europe choose DeepSeek? Cheaper? 80% savings? Who cares if it's Chinese, if you can get industrial productivity gains?
That's a quick thing to get through. No.
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 I mean, you can do what they did, you know, connect to the Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI APIs, turn them for 2 months, then train for 2 months, and then you have
DeepSeek.
No.
Or EuroSeek. EuroSeek.
Yeah. EuroSeek.
Got it. Okay. So by saying no, the implication is that Europe should choose the more expensive American model.
We have Mistral.
Mistral, okay.
You're using should, which is a nice word to use, and we can put whatever we want. Europe should develop its own. But if that's not possible for the time being, Europe should use the one that is the safest to use and that is the most convenient to use.
Right, so safety over security risks. Casper, you want to jump in?
No, I mean, just to throw my French friends under the bus, I mean, Mistral does have a strategic partnership with a non-European company as well, so you can sort of discuss a little bit where. Anyway, let's not go there. I think one of the big interesting aspects, since we're discussing this on the GLOBSEC and Think Tank Europe, is of course how compute has also become a question of balance of power,
sovereignty.
You know, what we've seen also lately is the question of where does the Nvidias or the AMDs of this world, where do they export their chips? Is it the Middle East? Is it Europe? Or is it elsewhere? I mean, I think for Europe, there is a real question around, do you get access to the compute capabilities, the data centers that will drive the AI opportunities? And do you have what some companies have called sort of AI sovereignty, where you can actually trust that those data sets, those innovations will remain in a geography or location or within the companies that operate them? I think that's one of the big challenges for Europe right now. And with all due respect, having one smaller data center in one country will not fix it. I think the real question is whether there's solidarity across the EU 27 member states to create an opportunity that will benefit ultimately all European countries. And this is where I'm, very cynical, being a former diplomat, that I think, when you look at the European 27 and their solidarity, there is a tendency that they focus on their own companies, not necessarily on European companies as such. But I think that's the real question of whether there is this political drive across Europe.
And you and I spoke about this coming down to the panel, where the buck stops. And it's very easy and convenient and it's right at your fingertips, so you can bash Brussels.
Yeah. But it's one of my favorite topics, and I'm sure there are some civil servants in the room today. I think there is a tendency in Europe right now, which is very unbecoming, that people tend to talk about Brussels as something very distinct. I've seen it in the European countries that I'm visiting right now. Even national governments saying, no, we are not happy with what happens in Brussels. Those are the same governments that sit in the working groups in Brussels. Take some goddamn responsibility and help fix it, rather than just saying the European Commission is part of the problem. The European commissioners are also appointed by the governments back home. And I think, without making too much of a historical parallel, I think that's how Brexit started. You speak about Brussels as something you don't have responsibility for. Come in, help fix it. European Parliament, European governments, and the working groups. That's the way to do it.
Great. I wish you had a mic.
Did you notice 2 people applauded? I mean, that's a personal success. Never happened before. Did you as well? 3 people. Thanks so much.
Questions from the audience. As we move to questions, I think please stand up, identify yourself, identify who you would like your question to go to. And I would also remind you that there is no such thing as a 2-part question. Ask the better question and save the other question for a less discriminating audience. Sir.
My name is Andrzej Pawluczuk. I work at the Technical University of Białystok and also represent the company WTT. We are a chemical engineering processing. Thanks to Joseph, I bought your 3D printer 4 years ago for my 9-year-old son. The printer is still working. and he developed his skills. I have the one question: how we can mobilize all money from European who stay in a bank on 1%, 2 or 3%, if we want to accelerate our business. And the second question, if I may, what will be in our automotive sector?
You lost control, Scott, right there.
4 or
That's
5
okay.
years.
Sorry, if you can finish the second question.
Okay. So, what will be the 3D printer sector, automotive sector in 4 or 5 years?
So I think that second question is for you.
So
the intersection of the auto sector and 3D printing. What are the consequences of you for the European auto sector?
I wanted to say, sometimes I say that 3D printing is in a state that if automotive sector would not be, nobody tried to help it in 5 years because there is just one company left. It would be like if Audi is remaining. But thank you. I love it. I love the fact that the same machine can be used by a kid to become an engineer, but at the same time, SpaceX can print parts on it, or NASA, or Siemens, or the same machine. So that's magical to me.
Financing question: where's the money coming from? We know that Europe, as of last week, is talking about or has talked about a $5 billion, excuse me, where's my Canadian coming out there? The €5 billion scale-up fund. Is that enough? Europe have the pockets for this fight?
It's not enough if we're purely relying on government investments. But I think the idea would be to seed some of that early stage or the ones that are not necessarily going to pan out, the discovery-based research, for example, if you can seed that with sovereign wealth funds, with government funds, and then move into things like family offices. Yeah. I mean, there's venture capital.
The $5 billion, if I understand correctly, and there are better Europeans here than I am. I am a European citizen. I'm a European immigrant. And I pay my taxes here, so I get to have an opinion. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah.
But if I understand correctly, the scale-up fund is being seeded with Wallenberg money, for some Danish money. The Novo Holdings is part of that. So there is private capital at the table. But frankly, €5 billion?
No, that's the starting point, right? I mean, when you create that center of gravity, that draws more capital in, and that will draw capital from the U.S., from Silicon Valley as well. So I think it's a good starting point. It's
before the Americans ride in with bigger pockets, is what you're saying.
It could be.
Could be. Next question, single question. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Kim Hedegaard. I'm from a Danish climate startup. I actually wanted to ask a different question, and then you had that wonderful question about whether we should
ask your best question.
Whether we should do DeepSeek or something else. So it will come out a little abrasive, but it's actually meant constructive, maybe especially to you, Kasper.
Oh my God, I'm very concerned about what's coming now.
Why should we pick an American-based solution rather than a Chinese-based solution, looking at it from a European perspective? Is American-based solutions more stable, also considering the current political climate, than a Chinese-based solution?
I love that you have to defend America.
Yeah. Time is up, so it's great to be here today. So I think that is the question to ask, and I would be untruthful if I said I'm not getting that question, if not on a daily basis, then very often these days. And, without becoming emotional, as somebody who spent most of my career in public service or in NATO and the European Union working for a close transatlantic relationship, I understand why there are significant concerns about whether you can trust the US and US technology these days. What I would say, though, is that I think the question is how the US technology companies are providing technology to Europe. In other words, will the technology ultimately align with European requirements, European concerns, European goals? And if we take the situation that has been quite damaging for those of us working for US technology companies, the International Criminal Court case in The Hague and the discontinuation of the email systems for the chief prosecutor, I think this is one of the areas where European customers are now demanding from US technology companies that business continuity will be there, or to put it a little bit more directly, are there kill switches in technology, not only in F-35s, but also in cybersecurity systems or in email systems? So in other words, I think for those companies, US companies that play by the rule book, that are willing to adopt, innovate, and align their technology with European concerns and European demands, I think there are good reasons to trust and retain that partnership, because at the end of the day, regardless of what is happening right now across the Atlantic, I think we have more in common than what sets us apart, but it requires both sides to, actually invest in that partnership. And I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I think, representing a US technology, we're not there yet. We need to continue doing our utmost to try and align our technology with what Europe is concerned about.
Any other questions? Good questions.
To others in the panel,
quickly to answer that question as well, I was impressed actually how fast tech companies turn a bit their codes in the US currently. Sorry, it's the truth. But still, there's a difference between China and US, which is that if we look, we don't build a company for the next 3 years, we build a company for the next 20 years. And if we look at, nobody knows what will happen in the next 20 years. But what we know is that in the last 20 years, Europe has been closer to US values than, or US has been closer to European values than China. So that's just, for me, the main reason, as simple as that.
Taking it out of the political sphere a little bit, it just makes good sense to be resilient and have multiple redundancies within a system. And so if we're relying on one strategic competitor or even one ally, that's still going to be a damaging proposition for us. Something could happen like a natural disaster and it's not a political issue. Yep. We still need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet without the US. If they're for some reason cut off or they have different focus areas, it's not about necessarily what's going on currently in the geopolitical situation. It's about making sure that we all have the capacity to step up.
Yep.
It's kind of remarkable to me that 364 days ago, Donald Trump was elected, and that we are already talking about a complete geopolitical realignment, that in literally less than a year, one man in the White House has managed to completely overturn 80 years of the transatlantic relationship. And to the point where Europeans are having serious conversations about what that means, because it isn't actually about what happens in 2028. It's whether the unreliability over the long term and what that means demographically, but also what that means for defense procurement. You mentioned F-35s.
And I think, again, saying something which I would not have said a couple of years ago, I think, I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of European leaders, across Europe, and a little bit more wide than that. Let me phrase this in a very precise way. I think people tend to underestimate how dramatic a change in the mindsets and the psychology we've seen in Europe and among European leaders in the last year. It is unbelievable, also for somebody who worked in this space for many, many years. And I think, when you look at that and you combine it with the kind of challenges we're looking ahead, there are good reasons why today, the French views around digital sovereignty or strategic autonomy, they're mainstream in Europe. They're not extreme. They're not sort of out there. We have the more traditionally transatlantic-oriented countries becoming the more skeptical countries. Scandinavian countries, the Netherlands, where, in fact, Central and Eastern Europe, I should mention this also because we're sitting here with GLOBSEC, they are the more transatlantic-oriented countries today. Now, I'm not happy about that. I think it's something we should be deeply concerned about because of what you said before. We have shared values and we will continue to have shared values, but I think it would be very wrong for us not to recognize that the situation is very different. And again, what is the deduction for companies? We need to come in, we need to chip in, we need to make sure that we also retain that transatlantic partnership by providing technology that is trustable, that is reliable, that doesn't take advantage of data sets, that doesn't take away control from European organizations, whether they're private or public. And if we do that, then I'm actually optimistic that we can help, whether we're US or non-US, we can help Europe be globally competitive at a moment where Europe's global competitiveness is unfortunately not going in the right direction.
Great. Well, we have 3 minutes left, and I have one final question. Actually, Peter, do you have a question? I have one final question for the panel. And I'm going to ask you to, we'll go down from Joseph down to Casper. The question is, and it is a 2-part question, so don't laugh at me. The first part is, I would like you to score on a scale of 1 to 10, your level of optimism or not as to whether Europe can close the gap when it comes to the global technology race. 10 being very, very, very optimistic, 0 being not optimistic at all. And the second part of my 2-part question, which doesn't exist, is I want you to tell us why you're scoring it at that number. Joseph, you first.
Okay. Well, that is that you're making it very difficult just to.
If you wanted simple questions, you're in the wrong panel.
Just by you want me to put just a number on that.
Yes.
I would say if we do a lot of things right, as we spoke, maybe inspiring how to really get the energy into people. I think we are at 8.5.
8.5. If we get everything right.
Yeah, but if
not a 10, 8.5 is like just great.
Yeah. But I mean, if I say 10, then it's not credible, right?
And if we get nothing right, what would you score it at?
Well, I think 2.
There's a 6.5 range in your answer. Okay, David.
Europe can bridge the gap. 80% confident. Europe will bridge the gap. 60% confident.
I love how you're conditioning all of your answers. You're giving yourself optionality. 80% will, 60%.
80% can, 60% will. I believe that the desire is there, the pace is not there, and that's my worry at a time where pace is so important in global competitiveness all around the world.
So for you, it's down to, because diagnosing the problem, the desire, we know it's there. What is going to be the factor that solves the
pace?
The pace.
The pace.
Right.
If we end up ourselves into long discussions, then we don't have time. I mean, we don't have time for long discussions anymore.
Right.
There was a time, I'm born in Belgium, so I like very much discussions and compromise and stuff like this. But that is not something we have the time for anymore in Europe.
So a non-Belgian solution to European.
Yeah, unhappily.
Heather.
Okay, so I'm currently completing my EMBA at Imperial College. This is relevant, I promise. And I've learned that the European and the UK approach to grading is very different than North American. So I'm going to be incredibly North American right now, and I'm going to say 10. Because I believe that we have every single building block in place. It's about using those effectively. So I think we absolutely have the potential. We just have to actually make use of it.
Great. Casper, Captain Positive.
It's such a shame to put me last in this because, I'm fundamentally sort of a pessimist when it comes to these things. I mean, Robert is already concerned what I'm going to say now. I will try and go the other way because I think when it comes to closing the gap on technologies, I'm not super optimistic when you look at the foundational technologies right around. So I would probably say sort of 3, 4-ish. But then I think because of the situation we're in right now with the geopolitical turmoil, Ukraine, I think this is a historic moment for Europe to come together, to invest more. I think there's a sense of urgency in trying to fix these issues. So I would probably put it sort of 5, 6. I think the big question on whether we are successful here is whether that sort of new world order will lead to political solidarity or political will to do something about it. And that goes back to the introduction of today. If we're only at 11% in terms of implementing the Draghi report, it's not looking great right now. So I think a little bit of crisis is not bad for getting European unity. I think it's needed if Europe is going to have a place at the table in the next couple of decades.
So I'm going to mark you down as a 5.5, Casper. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking my panel as they have solved the Draghi report. Casper, Heather, David, Josef, I'm going to ask you to stay in your seats for just a moment as I welcome up Jan Skrapcha who's the head of the, I'm going to say this wrong, DUS project. He's going to give us a short briefing as we stay here. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me bridge. Can you hear me? Perfect. Let me bridge these two panels about the technology and savings investment union. Probably we all know these examples of entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs who have the customers, who have the orders, but who would like to grow, but they don't have the financial capacities for that grow. That's not an isolated story. That's quite often the story of European SMEs, unfortunately. But we have to count on the SMEs because they count like 99% of all European businesses, and they create 2/3 of European jobs, but they are really lacking the access to capital markets. On the other hand, we have the households. They can save hundreds of billions of euros every year. Majority of them are idle at current accounts. And then we have the capital market and savings and investment union proposals, but it's still rather on a paper. Maybe let me present you one part of like real initiative. That's the DEUS project, Decentralized EU Securities Service, where we create, let's say, new level of capital markets accessible for SMEs. We offer them with a real opportunity to issue their own digital bonds. No speculations, no crypto, real bonds of real SMEs that are the backbone of the European economy. These bonds are really transparent, and these bonds are secure because they are relying on blockchain, on the European ledger, European blockchain services infrastructure, where the regulators, the issuers, and also the investors can see them. We are basically turning the savings and investment union into reality. How does it work? Basically, SMEs issues the bonds, and the investors, it might be a bank, fund, or even a citizen, can buy these bonds transparently on blockchain on one centralized, decentralized and centralized platform on blockchain. We are not a startup. We are creating a new ecosystem. We are also not competing with the banks or exchanges. We are basically connecting them. And how to proceed on. We have been talking a lot about competitiveness and about defense, but this is unfortunately not possible without SMEs. But these SMEs are lacking the capital and capital access to the capital markets. And the Danish presidency mentioned here, and I'm glad to hear that they are focusing on real initiatives instead of writing numerous other pages of strategies. So what we are presenting is the real initiative to create a capital market on blockchain for SMEs, because European Union has the innovations, has also the innovators, the human capital, but what we are lacking is the system which, let's say, connects the dots, connects the investors and the idle capital with the real businesses. So this is what we are building, and we would be happy if you join and partner with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Gregorio Sorgi. I'm a reporter at Politico, where I cover the EU economy and the budget. And I'll be moderating this discussion where we'll talk about how Europe can mobilize capital to boost growth and innovation, And this conversation will directly contribute to the GLOBSEC competitiveness tracker, which is an assessment of how the EU delivers on its competitiveness compass goals. And this conversation links to the tracker's chapter on financial markets. And now let me introduce our guests for this panel, because we're joined by Morten Botskov, who's the Minister for Business, Industry and Financial Affairs for Denmark. Then we have Merete Klosen, who is the Deputy Chief Executive of the European Investment Fund, which finances SMEs and supports innovation across Europe. Then we have Ole Krogh Petersen, who's the CEO of PFA Pension, which is Denmark's largest pensions fund. And last but not least, we have Andreas Schwarz, who is the head of cabinet to Commissioner Zacharyeva, in charge of startups, research and innovation. And I encourage all of you to think about questions for our panelists, as there will be a Q&A session at the end where you can ask your questions. But I'd like to start with you, Ole Krogh Petersen, because Denmark is often used as an example when it comes to investing in pensions and savings to boost investments across the economy. And this is something that Europe has long wanted to replicate, but it has struggled so far. What do you think that the EU as a whole should do to better use its pensions and savings to develop its capital markets, and perhaps learn from the Danish example?
Well, the easy answer would be to copy the system we have in Denmark.
How?
But that is probably not so easy. Basically, we have, as Draghi also pointed out, that in Denmark, Sweden, and Netherlands, we have about 60% of the total pension funds in Europe, and we only have stands for 7.5% of the population. And what we have done in a Danish perspective is a bold decision back in the 80s and the beginning of the 90s between the social parties of the labor market and politicians, making an effort to basically having mandatory employer contributions together with a strong professional asset management setup that are able to combine all the household savings into investments that can combine having good returns that can be good for retirement, but also taking responsibility for the societal issues that we have. But basically, this bundling all the household savings, that I think is the important thing here. Because if you look around in Europe, you basically will see there will be a lot of savings in passive bank accounts, where it's difficult to get the money out, living in stock, bonds, unlisted companies, etc. But so the idea of having things put together, I would say that that's the main thing. And if you look at the numbers here, from a Danish point of view, I think we have nearly 80% of households in Denmark in bonds, shares, and unlisted companies. And then look at Euro as an average, then it's about 50% of that. So you have something to look up to and be inspired by.
And I'm interested in what the European Union can do to boost savings across the bloc and to replicate the Danish example. And I'd like to ask Minister Botskov, because pensions are a national prerogative, and the Commission can issue recommendations in this field. But what do you think the EU should do better to convince member states to invest savings and pensions in a more productive way?
First of all, I think it has to be dealt with on a national level. It has to be like we have developed our pension system here in Denmark, done between the labor market partners, and it's totally up to the member state themselves to take decisions like we have done. There's no doubt that the Danish model, as we call it, have created stability on the labor market. And if you look all around Europe and the world, it is special in a positive way, and it has created a huge amount of stability in and among the participants in the labor market, and transform the development of the labor market that we have seen since the 80s have, I mean, we have had conflicts, but not that many as you see in other countries. And I guess it's fair to say that the model that was created in the mid 80s, especially, have coped the interests in a positive and a constructive way. There's a forum where around the pension funds and the organization that created the model where we talk together now. The number of huge labor conflicts that we have in Denmark is since then can be counted on one hand, I think. So that's positive. What can others learn from that? Exactly that. If you want progress and if you want growth, if you want a stable environment for investment, I think you should do like what we are doing. So
Okay.
it's relatively easy. And then, of course, you should combine it with labor market reforms. Because the main reason why Ole has that lot of money in his pension fund is exactly that. We have done labor market reforms, meaning that people are staying in the labor force for as long as they are actually in Denmark now.
Yeah.
So the Danish model combined with ongoing labor market reforms is, I guess, the main answer to why Ole is that wealthy as he is.
And another Danish priority for the presidency has been simplification, and that's something you've been working on a lot. And in particular, in your field of work, there has been the CSRD, the sustainability reporting that has been launched and approved and concluded under the Danish presidency. What do you respond to critics in Brussels who are saying that this amounts to deregulation and not simplification? And the other popular criticism is that this is really a response to what's happening in the US under Donald Trump. How do you respond to this?
I'll try to make it a short answer. Simplification is the answer to the position and the situation Europe is in right now. I mean, let me put it the other way. Some in our, so to say, political environment in Europe think that complex green legislation equals more green jobs. It's actually quite the opposite. Why? Because we see that already. We wanted with the legislation, for example, on the sustainability reporting, to make Europe more attractive for foreign investments, so that you could see, all of you, I mean, okay, this company is moving fast in the green direction, the other company is moving faster, so we'll invest in that. But it actually turned out as a bureaucratic monster. I mean, we are asking companies who want to be green, be more attracted to green investments, to report hundreds and hundreds of reporting points for no use. The only job success that this has created is among accountants. I'm sorry. I mean, you could ask Ole, who's reading Ole's reports? His board, of course. Well, I guess that's it.
And the journalists.
Yeah, and the journalists. I guess that's it. And I know Ole that much, than his board that much. They have already made the decision that it is valuable for them to invest in green technologies, for example, green transition, offshore wind, all of that. They don't need extremely huge hundreds of pages of reports coming from the sustainability reporting circus that we have created. It has only created jobs in the accountant sector. That's also why they are a bit sad of the things that we're doing now.
But many in the European Parliament would disagree with you, and we've seen
Some do,
we've seen in Brussels that there has been this tendency for the Council to go very, very much in the direction of simplification, and for the European Parliament or some parties to push back. Are you worried that the same will happen with the CSRD?
The Parliament actually didn't come up with an agreement here at the first time, but I hope they will, and hopefully we. Before the end of November, we'll have a trilogue with the Parliament, so that we, in our presidency, will be able actually to have an agreement on the sustainability reporting. And it is an enormous project, I mean, if we end where the compromise more or less are now, we will be able to reduce burdens for Danish companies, only Danish companies, but I'm not speaking about other European companies, but seen from a Danish perspective, with around 1 billion euros a year. Only by that. So it's enormous. And that's simply via simplification, not deregulation. And what's the difference? The difference is that we're not changing the goal. We are simplifying the road to reach the goal and making it more fast and more transparent and giving the companies that have to report also in the future a sort of a digital way forward. They don't have to write sort of letters all of up and down as they have now. Digital automatic reporting is at the core of what we're working for. I mean, and again, I think we need to understand that, I mean, complex, heavy green legislation doesn't bring more green jobs and more investments. So we have to, it's exactly the opposite right now because of the situation that we can see that investments are moving now. And Europe is not the green spot on the globe. China is. I'm sorry. That's the way. They are the country that now invest the most in green transition. It's not Europe, it's China. So if you want to change that, we need to simplify and keep the goals, but simplify the road to reaching the goal. That's the agenda.
On this note, I'd like to turn to Marita Klose from the EIF. How should we expect the role of the EIF to change with the new competitiveness fund that will be part of the new budget, the new MFF? Should we expect it to be more focused on defense and less on green investments compared to what we've seen over the last 5 years or so?
Okay, so first of all, the Competitiveness Fund will only come online in the next MFF. So it's now...
Are we dealing with that now?
And the Danish presidency is pushing it through the co-legislator, the legislative procedure. So we are still working with the budget of the current MFF. And we are already, let's say, ramping up for the next MFF. So we see our responsibility in the EIF very much a responsibility of supporting the companies from the startup phases through the growth and scale up. And there's certainly now a very intense focus on the scale up phase, what we call the second valley of death, if you will. That we have always, supported the competitiveness of companies, but this is where we now, as Europe and with European public money, really need to make our utmost efforts. And we are sitting on some 143 billion of assets under management, which is mandates that we have from our mothership, the European Investment Bank, from the European Commission, from the European budget, obviously, and then from a number of other stakeholders, the member states, the national promotional banks, and so on and so forth. Also some private investors, but the majority of all these funds are public funds. So we have now a responsibility of bringing out, crowding in more private funds. We are doing it already with the current program, which is going to be continued into the next MFF, according to the Commission's proposal. It's called InvestEU.
Yeah.
And some 70% of the funds that we're mobilizing with that come from private, but we need even more of that. And we see also it's a new type of startups. It's a new type of companies. It's companies that are very much moving into new areas of tech. It's tech that you could sort of very generally describe as tech that is related to the resilience and security of Europe. So not only defense as such, although we have also broadened our eligibility criteria so that we can do defense, but it's also the wider problem of ensuring that we are more self-sufficient, that we are not dependent of the world around us when it comes to energy, when it comes to grid infrastructure, storage of electricity, a number of also AI, data centers, and so on. And we are trying now to help both most the larger companies that need the bigger tickets. So we invest not directly into companies because others do that, but we invest into the funds that are able to write out those big tickets for the companies that need big funding to grow and thrive in Europe.
And on security and defense, where is the limit as to what the EIF and where the EIF can invest? Can it invest in all kinds of defense, or where is the red line currently, and could it change in the future?
A couple of years ago, we could only do dual use. That has now been changed. Our shareholders decided that now we will be able to do also single use, so projects and technologies and investments that are directly related to military equipment, police equipment. We cannot, because it was decided to continue to exclude weapons and ammunition. It's of course the question of definition. What is a weapon? But this is right now excluded from our eligibility. And
could it be expanded in the future?
That is up to our shareholders at the end of the day, which are the member states.
We have one, and a member state on the panel. Do you think it would be a good idea to further stretch the lines as to what can be financed by the EIF?
Yeah,
and the
no
EIB?
offense from here. I mean, you cannot have a white paper on defense coming out of the Commission on the one hand and not investing it with the other. I mean, that's maybe why we're lagging behind in Europe. So I guess it's relatively clear.
Meaning that more should be done.
Meaning that when European defense companies need risk-willing capital to help them build up, scale up, I think we need to help them.
But how do you get there? Do you think that going beyond what is currently allowed by EIF and EIB is a good solution that can be explored? Meaning investing directly in weapons and ammunition.
Yeah, I mean, if the threat is coming directly from Russia as it is now, I mean, should we just say, well, okay, we have a mandate here. We're sorry, Putin. We cannot defend ourselves. I mean, it's relatively clear. So, and we have, our position. And I guess, I mean, if we want to create a European defense sector industry and not just having working groups discussing, presenting white papers as we've done for too many years, I think, there's only one way forward. I mean, if we want, as I said, to build a European industry and not also in the future buy it all from the Americans. I mean, we need risk-willing capital to invest in that. And the discussions that we have now is that is also critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is not only hydrogen pipelines, offshore windmills, and so on. It's also a defense sector and defense industry, cybersecurity, for example.
Yeah.
So I guess it's relatively clear the situation we're in now is alarming, and if we don't ramp up and do the investments, I think we'll hand over the upper hand to the ones that we want to lose in Ukraine right now. That's it.
And now I'll turn to Andreas Preuss from the Commission. I won't ask you if investing in the EIB in defense is a good idea, but I'll talk about the Scale Up Europe, which is closely linked to what the EIF is doing, and it's been launched last week, and it's an initiative that will allow the Commission to support the Minister will have to leave now. Thank you for being with us. And so I was talking about the Scale Up Europe that will allow the Commission to invest in and to scale up larger European startups and SMEs. In what ways do you think that this can contribute to mobilizing investments and savings across Europe?
Yes, in fact, this is a public-private partnership already from the start. So this is not just money of the European Commission, but together with private partners like Novo Nordisk, IFO, who is also present here in the room, Peter, and Spanish investors, Santander, Italian investors, Swedish investors. So we are a group of 10 investors. And the objective is indeed to have a direct equity fund for deep tech, so AI, quantum, biotech, clean tech, dual use, to invest directly in companies with tickets above 30 million euro, which is exactly the growth stage that is missing in Europe for the time being. That's why many of our best startups, when they come to the growth stage, are leaving Europe. I heard yesterday a statistic of Denmark that Denmark has created 14 unicorns and 9 of them are now in the US. So that is exactly the kind of situation this fund wants to address. Very important, it's going to be managed by a private investment advisor. So the public sector or the Commission has zero role or influence in individual investment decision. This will be done by a private investor or fund manager. And we want to start that project on the 1st of April. And we think that actually this fund will bring in not just the capital that we have already brought in, but also when we invest in individual startups or scale-ups, we will always co-invest with other private venture capital funds. So it will trigger a lot of investment also from other venture capital funds. So we think this is quite a good answer, a very concrete answer, not a white paper, but a concrete project to bring Europe forward.
But what will be exactly the role of the Commission in this fund?
The role of the Commission was, if you want, first of all, we provide 1 billion of capital to this fund, which is going to have a size of 5 billion. And we hope that the public sector will have roughly 1/3 of the capital share and the private sector 2/3 of the capital share. That's the objective. And we have, in a sense, launched that project. We have talked with the private sector. We have found the investors or discussed with them and brought them on board. So our job, if you want, has been to bring together the best of European industry or banking to create this fund together.
And another big idea that the Commission has and that will be presented in March to boost cross-border investments is this 28th regime, which we've been hearing a lot. And the basic idea is to have a common rule book to support innovative companies. I appreciate that this is not entirely within the remit of your commissioner, but could you give us some clues as to which companies will fall under the remit of this 28th regime and why this could succeed where previous iterations of the 28th regime have failed in the past? What will the Commission do to ensure that this time this initiative can be more successful?
Yeah, no, indeed. The idea is to have a regime actually for all companies in Europe. We first thought we only have startups there. But then if you only have startup, what happens if the company falls out of the definition of startup? Then the normal rules apply. So we felt it's much smarter to have a regime for all companies in Europe. So very quick registration, digital, within 48 hours, small amount of capital, and then these companies can operate in the whole of the single market and don't have to do individual registration in all the other 27 member states. So that's very much company law. Now, the key question will be what add-ons do we have? For example, taxation of stock options, which is a big issue in the startup world. Do we include rules for that, which would make it easier and in a harmonized way in Europe for startups to have their stock options, or for employees to have their stock option taxed? Then labor issue. It was mentioned that Denmark is a role model for many things. One other aspect that is exemplary in Denmark is flexicurity. And there is now a big study ongoing by a French economist, Olivier Coste, who basically shows that economies with a relatively flexible labor market are more innovative. So you have that, of course, with the US, because there you have hire and fire. but you have it also in Denmark where you have flexicurity. So, and this is something we are also looking in. This is of course very touchy because you're going to deal with labor market issues, but we are talking about not the factory worker of Volkswagen, but we are talking about data mining specialists, computer scientists, AI specialists. Those people, even if they lose their job, they will find a job in no time again, because this is such a dynamic market. So if we can ease a little bit the severance pay and rigid labor market rules for these kind of people, we think there could be a major boost for innovation. Why do I think now the scope of the initiative is not yet decided, so this is being discussed more or less as we speak. Why do I think it has higher chances of success? I think everyone in Europe feels we are approaching the moment where either we have to move or we are running into very serious trouble. If you see the job losses of industry in Germany, which I think is 10,000 per month for the time being, I mean, you have to do something. You have to make life easier, be it simplification, being initiatives like the 28th regime. I think the political momentum for change is so strong in Europe, and you have a European Commission that is determined to deliver this change. I mean, as far as we can do it, we can propose. It's then for the member states and the parliament to agree. But what makes me hopeful is indeed the momentum we have for these kind of issues.
Two interesting things that you were saying, that tax and labor markets, which so far, and I mean they are now national prerogatives, that in the 28th regime there could be a common EU rules on both of these. Is that something that you think? Do you think that this is a taboo that can be overcome as early as next year?
It will be difficult, but what is interesting, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, but if these aspects are part of the 28th regime, they are ancillary to the 28th regime, meaning they don't fall under unanimity, but they can be voted with qualified majority, which already in the council, which already increases the likelihood of adoption. Now, I think the labor market issue will be extremely difficult. I will not lie about this. And I'm also not saying that the Commission will propose it, but it is one of the things we think, my commissioner thinks we could propose. But for example, the issue of taxation of stock options, that we will push very much, that will be part of the 28th regime. Because if it's just company law, it's interesting, it's nice, but if it doesn't have these additional features which make life easier for startups and scale-ups, we are losing a major opportunity.
And the last question on this point, as a Brussels journalist, I care a lot about process. So what is why can this be agreed by QMB and not by qualified majority and not by unanimity?
I shouldn't have said that. But I'm not a lawyer, but you know, the company law that falls under, will probably have an internal market legal basis. So the company law part can be under qualified majority because the legal basis. Now, what I understand, and again, I'm not a lawyer, if you have certain elements that are linked to that proposal but are ancillary. So the main purpose is not to change labor market legislation. The main purpose of this initiative is not to change taxation rules across the board, but just in a very specific and circumscribed way, then it can be considered ancillary to the main proposal and therefore fall under qualified majority.
That's clear. And I want to hear the view from the private sector from you, Ole. Do you think that having a common EU rulebook could make it easier for a pension fund like yours, like PFA, to pool funds together with other pensions funds from elsewhere in Europe?
Well, only if it creates a simpler regulation that will make approval process and the administrative bureaucracy easier. Otherwise, no. But I think it's important that it is a barrier for startup and scale up to go into that mature phase, also having to deal with the regulation and tough regulation as well, and especially approval process, all the bureaucracy which makes it slow, and that's a problem. So if we can deal with that, then it's good. But I think it's also important to say when we talk about investment here, it's investment in listed companies, etc. That's not the problem. It's an investment in startup, scale up, and having the right model or having the right framework to deal with it. That's an issue, and that's one of the reasons why when you have reached the scale up, you go to another place because they have easier way of dealing with a more risky capital, etc. Because if we look at, just take PFA, we have approximately 100 billion euros under management. Half of that is invested in Europe. So we are heavily invested in Europe. Half of that again, Denmark. So of course, mainly in Denmark. But again, just to say, we are heavily invested in Europe, but we are still trying to find the way of to go into the more growth competitiveness area where you have the startups and the scale-ups. How do we do that? Because we need a cooperation between private and public, where the public sector, both with the scale-up, but also with your fund structure, where the public side may be able to give some kind of guarantees or risk sharing that enable new funds or direct investments to actually create returns that are important for us. Because if we go in, we invest our customers' retirement savings. So we are obligated to make sure that we balance risk with returns. So it has to be some kind of long-term risk-adjusted return. And sometimes when you were talking about this startup phase, it's risky. So in order to find a balance there, you have to find some kind of risk sharing. And we have models that actually works, and we need to look further into that and have a fund structure that can support that with maybe support from European organizations as well.
Okay, thanks for that. And now I'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. I see that there is someone very keen to ask a question, and if you could introduce yourself, that would be great. So over to you.
We'll have to run, but maybe we can be.
Thank you very much. My name is Ludovine Wouters. I'm an advisor to minerals companies and investors working on the EU's minerals agenda. I'm very concerned that all afternoon the minerals, which are foundational to the entire agenda, have not been brought up. I'm even more concerned that the Commission doesn't have a clear plan to fund minerals. I know they're going to go under the Competitiveness Fund, but the approach of shoehorning minerals into innovation, development, or other priorities has failed so far. So I'm not convinced by its perpetuation. EIB Group has made fantastic announcements, no financing decisions. So I would like to know whether the speakers have a view as to how, as public sector, but also as European private sector, we align European funding with the critical minerals priorities, without which none of the agenda actually can be realized.
Who wants to start?
Well, I can start as far as the EIB group is concerned. It's not true, though, that we haven't financed critical raw materials projects that we have. It's true that this is something relatively recent. It has also been a part of our broadening of eligibility criteria over the last years. For instance, under our Invest EU program, the big Commission-supported program, we had the scope of the program extended so that it's now possible to finance critical raw materials projects. We look at it very much from a value chain perspective. So we look at it also very much in terms of how can we ensure that the critical raw materials that are already incorporated, for instance, into products can be extracted, can be reused and recycled from the circular economy perspective. And we have targets also now, which is a novelty for the group. We have targets now for critical raw materials projects for the next couple of years, that we would finance at least 3 billion worth of critical raw material projects in the value chain. So it is something that we are also ramping up. For the EIF specifically, since we invest in funds only, we need to find funds that are willing to have critical raw materials as part of their investment strategy. There are very, very few funds, I can tell you, because we are surveying. We have 1,200 funds already in our portfolio. So we know the venture capital and private equity market pretty good, and the fund managers that are out there. And there are not many who have the expertise, the track record to really look into these type of projects. We have done due diligence on a couple that really had as a dedicated investment strategy. But apart from that, we are trying also to look for funds that are at least for part of their activity willing to look into critical raw materials projects. So I think it's something that you will see more and more. But it has been a long building up to it. Yes, I will admit.
Maybe just to add, I was working once for Vice President Verheugen and was co-authoring the raw materials initiatives. That was in 2010, I think. So I totally share the passion for the subject. And of course, I think that Europe should finance this. I mean, it's so obvious. We are so critically dependent on a number of them. Now, if I have not mentioned that, it's for the Scale Up Europe Fund, it's because, I mean, this is a deep tech, mainly a deep tech fund. Now, as far as raw materials can be deep tech, perhaps they could be financed in the sense that if you need maybe some technology, you know, to get them, then I would not maybe exclude it, but it's certainly not the primary focus of our fund. But there will be other instruments. There have to be other instruments to finance this. And I know that the Commission is now working flat out, I mean, colleagues in DG GROW, to try to address this issue of critical raw materials. I mean, this is a big bottleneck, is becoming a big bottleneck for many of our companies. So I think I can say that we fully share the urgency of this issue, and that we also look at instruments. It's just that the Scale Up Europe Fund is maybe not the best instrument for that.
Then, if you have nothing else to add, we have a question on the right.
Very much. So I'm Miro Gasparek, CEO and co-founder of Sensible Biotechnologies. So obviously, as a founder, this resonates with me. And now at Sensible, we are building a very unique platform for mRNA therapeutics design, manufacturing, and scale up, and for enabling the biomanufacturing supply chain. And what is interesting about our company, so we are the class of companies of which there are plenty in Europe. We have a US Delaware C Corp because we got a funding from the leading US investors, raised over 13 million from Y Combinator and others. But we do have our labs in the UK and in Slovakia, of all places. Our technology has been deemed strategic by a number of publicly traded companies and governments. The reason why I'm kind of asking you is this. For many of us, and if you want to build a real breakthrough company, well, you need to start in the US, or at least until recently you had, because in Slovakia, you didn't even have ESOP.
Get to the question.
To get to the question, what is going to happen, or like, is these funds that are starting, which is a adorable initiative, are they going to be able to go and invest and attract the companies which are incorporated as their topcos in the US and would like to grow their European operations and build up here? How do we attract them in general?
I mean, maybe for the Scale Up Europe Fund, we would certainly want them to move their headquarters to Europe and their IP to Europe. Exactly the same way that if American venture capital firms poach some of our best companies, they want the headquarters and the IP to be moved to the US. So that is, I would say, the answer. I mean, we will not finance an American, I mean, with the Scale Up Europe Fund, American company based in the US where the IP stays in the US. That doesn't make any sense for our fund. But if they are willing to relocate, and in fact, I have already spoken with some investors. There are some investors who are thinking about this in the clean tech area and also in the health area. So this is not at all a theoretical scenario, but this could really be happen. And why not for once turn that around, after decades where it was always going the other way?
Can you name anyone who's been interested in moving from the US to
no,
Europe?
No, absolutely not, absolutely not.
And are we talking about dozens, hundreds?
Look, first of all, so there are not so many who know yet about the Scale Up Europe Fund. It's a relatively new initiative. Also, I mean, this is not the primary objective. I think we want our European companies to be able to grow in Europe. That is the primary objective. But of course, we don't exclude a scenario that companies that are in other parts of the world, if they're willing to relocate to Europe, bring their IP, bring their headquarters, why not finance them then? So if it's a great company and that falls within the scope of the fund, why not?
But why do you think that many are leaving the US for Europe now? Why do you think the tide is turning now specifically?
Well, in certain, health-related subjects, that there are certain restrictions in the US now. Also, clean tech is maybe not so popular, although you also have some great clean tech projects in the US. It just happened that I have talked to one American investor who was very interested to relocate to Europe.
Okay.
But isn't from a European point of view, I would say that it's more important to stop companies start up and then move away.
Exactly.
And attracting, of course, that could be fine, but I think the important stuff is to find a model not to have the companies being forced out of Europe to US due to the fact that there are more risky capital or more flexible requirements, etc. So I would say that we start there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we're concerned, it's a bit anecdotal yet. Still, we see some American investors that are quite interested in Europe. We see a certain brain gain, if you will, in Europe as well, which is very interesting for a lot of funds. Because the talent pool here in Europe is to some extent gaining from the fact that on the other side of the Atlantic there are some developments that they do not necessarily agree with, but we cannot say yet that there's sort of really statistics underpinning this feeling that we have. What we do is that for our funds, and this is both for the very big funds we have that we support under our Tech Champions initiative, we do require that most of their activities, most of their investments are in Europe. But these funds are so big that they are basically global by nature. So, you cannot fully exclude that they also invest to some extent outside of Europe, because then there simply wouldn't be enough big funds for us to invest in here in Europe. But we're also very conscious that we have a responsibility to build up the whole ecosystem of funds in Europe, so that the big funds, I mean, it's great what the Commission is doing with the Scale Up Fund. We need many more of those. And that's what we are trying to do with our Tech Champions initiative, to have many more of the funds that can raise at least 1 billion euros or more, because they are of the size that they are able to support the companies with the big tickets that they need in order to either stay in Europe, be attracted to Europe, or come back to Europe if it's companies that have tried their luck in the US and now would like to come back.
And if I can ask a very quick follow-up on this brain gain that you were talking about, do you also feel that this is concentrated in the clean tech sector and in all those kinds of industries that are now less fashionable with the new US administration?
Yes, I think it's more predominant in that sector, but it also, I think, reflects that the general tendency that we see among the funds that we are investing in, that they do hire more and more with scientific background, so engineers and so on. Because when you want to get into a lot of these emerging tech sectors, you simply need people who understand what these technologies are about, and rather than only having people with a finance background, they want to hire engineers, they want to hire scientists. So I think that's definitely part of also the market. I think in Europe is flourishing. Is flourishing in that respect. Yeah.
Perhaps just to add two quick points. We have a program called Marie Skłodowska-Curie. This is for researchers to to come to Europe and so on. And we see a fourfold increase of applicants from outside of Europe. And also we have the ERC, European Research Council super grants, and we see 4 times the numbers of American applications to come to Europe. So this is already happening now. And perhaps one other word, just exactly to complement what Merete has said, our initiatives with the Scale Up Europe Fund and the EIF, or the European Tech Champions Initiative, are extremely complementary, because we are a direct equity vehicle. So we are one fund investing directly in companies, and the EIF and also the Tech Champions, they invest in the ecosystems. They're trying to build up other venture capital funds, which we absolutely need, and that those can also then co-invest with the Scale Up Europe Fund. So these two initiatives are very complementary.
And I'm afraid that the time is over now. I'm sorry if there were people in the audience who weren't allowed to ask a question, but now I have to hand over to Peter Lundqvist, who's the CEO of Exports and Investment Fund of Denmark. Over to you.
Okay, yeah, from a little productivity from 4 or 5 to 1, but I've been asked to give you a very brief presentation of a case which is, in at least we believe, in the cutting edge of deep tech investments. That's something Eric sits there doing most of the work for me, but we did it it's a year and a half ago, something like that we launched it. It's the AI-based powered supercomputer called Gefion. It's located here somewhere in Copenhagen. For security reasons, we cannot say exactly where it is. But just to give you a bit of flavor about how we understand investing in this deep tech space, I would like to start with take you back, let's say 100 and 125 to 130 years to the US. Back in the days when the US didn't have railroads. And then you all know Vanderbilt, he built the railroads. The railroads provided infrastructure. That infrastructure fundamentally changed the country. Also made Vanderbilt extremely rich, but in that order, I guess. Then not too far after that, you had New York City, within a very, very short period of time, climbing up to be by far the most vibrant and economically viable city in the world. It was also the first city in the world that was fully electrified. And what is the point about mentioning these two things? Of course, Europe would like to catch up and close the hole to the US. That's obvious, in particular in deep tech and in particular in venture capital. Goes without saying. But my point being, those things that are very important to move the needle on productivity and fundamental change in society has a lot to do with investing in infrastructure. Today, we have a lot of infrastructure that we all know about that is immensely important, energy infrastructure in particular. That's incredibly important for overall productivity of society. But we also have what I would like to call it the invisible digital infrastructure. Most people don't think of that like infrastructure, but we certainly do in Denmark and in IFO. And we think that capacity to have AI-based computing, maybe in some years also capacity to have quantum-based computing, quantum-based sensing, other things, are a fundamental part of the infrastructure of a society that would like to be a major player in the world 10, 20, 25, 50 years from now. And that's why we're so proud that we've been able to attract, let's say, the AI-based chips from NVIDIA, that we've, together with the Novo Nordisk Foundation, created a company called Danish Center for AI Innovation. And the main active component of that company is the Gefion supercomputer that's available for researchers, companies, and all other parties in, let's say, in the northern European hemisphere or somewhere else, to develop ideas, businesses, research, everything that is fundamental for improving productivity and progress in society. So that's the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And now you can enjoy a coffee break. And following that, there will be a healthcare session. Perfect.